Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable podcast. It is Sunday, the 21st of December. This is episode 11 of our weekly broadcast live at youtube.com/Australian Roundtable from 4 p.m, usually Australian Eastern Standard Time every Sunday, and also archived on the same channel for later listening if you can't tune in live. I'm your host, Johnno, and I'm pleased to be joined in the studio, as usual, by my co-panelist, Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And it's been a big week, mate. How have you been?
Getting there.
Yeah?
Getting there.
Don't worry, we're going to get there.
Trying to stay away from as much mainstream media coverage as I can to keep sane, but other than that, pretty good.
Well, I'll tell you what, we do have a few new listeners to the show, so I'll just run through this little blurb that we always do. The Australian Roundtable podcast is a Brisbane-based independent news, analysis, discussion panel podcast which broadcasts live every Sunday from 4 p.m. Episodes are available to listen to live and are also archived for later listening at the Australian Roundtable YouTube channel. Live listeners can also take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts, and we've already got a few people in there. Good to see Jaden and Tigers and Justice for Germans in there. Good to see you boys there today. Now, the show features an eclectic panel of presenters who come together each week to discuss recent and topical news and current affairs from Australia and around the world. The show provides an alternative perspective to that presented by the mainstream media and is aimed at listeners in Australia and abroad who are sceptical of the official narratives being pushed by governments and the mainstream media. Views presented by individual panellists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and each presenter is solely responsible for his or her own comments and claims. All important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to in the info box and at our website, ausroundtable.com, so you can verify it for yourself. And although it is a roundtable discussion, we do try to keep a rough structure for each episode, and I'll get on to today's rundown. Now, normally we do, Ethan, a domestic and an international segment. Owing to what's transpired this week, we're probably going to be mostly domestic this week. We're going to be discussing, of course, the Sydney siege that took place on Monday. But we're going to try and break that conversation down into 5 topics.
Yep.
First, we're going to discuss what's going to follow from that incident on Monday, specifically legislation that we think might be passed soon. The second sub-segment that we'll get into will be the coverage of the incident on the day. The third sub-segment will be the other issues that this particular event drowned out from the media on the Sunday and the Monday. The fourth topic will be Tessa Kum and the illridewithyou hashtag, because I've got some very interesting information that I found while doing some web searching about that young lady. And then the fifth topic, and the one that I'm sure most of our listeners are looking forward to hearing the most, which is the many inconsistencies of the official story from the Monday. Yep. So those are the 5 sub-segments. I'm struggling with that one today. And if we get through all of that, we might also get a chance to briefly discuss the goggle box that you were telling me about before the show, and also this North Korea, the interview business. Hopefully we get time for that, but that we might not, because we've got so much to discuss today.
Huge week.
Owing to this Sydney siege. Now, for people who aren't aware, which I can't imagine is anybody, to try and come across as professional, the basic details are that on Monday of this week, what was that, the 16th, I guess? On Monday, the 16th, in Sydney, our largest city here in Australia, there was an incident where officially a gunman took 18 hostages in a Lindt cafe. Sometime in the morning, there was a siege that lasted about 16 hours, culminated in the deaths of 2 people, and the freeing, I guess, of the rest of the hostages dominated the news for the entire day in this country, and also made world news around the globe, and has been on the news pretty much until the last couple of days. Of course, there was another incident in northern Queensland that has kind of moved it off the front page, but we might discuss that later if we get a chance. So that's the brief background to what happened on Monday. Ethan, I've been talking for too long. Take it away.
Well, here we go. This is going to be an exciting episode, isn't it? Immediately from the get-go, I worked as hard as I could to break down what I'd seen that day and to break it up into these sub-segments that we're going to be talking about today. And I managed to break it down in an article on my website, tottnews.com, not exploring my personal opinions or the inconsistencies, although I do raise a couple in that. I broke it down to talk about undeniable facts about, one, how government and media are going to benefit from this. And this includes the push now with the lone wolf narrative to enforce new legislation and to pass the metadata retention scheme that has been being debated in the Senate, which is highly controversial. Then the media coverage on the day, and of course, obviously, what it distracted us from. So I'll just read out some of that from the website, because I've My analytical self is a lot better than my impromptu self, so I'll just read that out. The echoes of opinion, much like this piece, have been accentuated in widespread fashion across internet platforms, television sets, and political arenas following the recent events in Martin Place, Sydney. Some have said it's a false flag, some have said it's a hoax, and some are divided amongst the specific details of the official narrative. Indeed, there are many troubling questions in the aftermath of this event, many inconsistencies, theories, and confusion as to what took place in Sydney. Although if you watch the mainstream media, there's no confusion at all and everything is completely fine. The official story is the one and only. And if
even when it changes in the same news bulletin.
So the first segment I did was the lone wolf and anti-terrorism legislation, because listeners that have tuned into other episodes know that I follow the anti-terrorism legislation very closely, and I've broken this down over many episodes. And I said, in the eyes of the establishment, the last 24 hours have proven everything our intelligence and government officials have warned the Australian public about for the better half of 3 months. And that is, the lone wolf extremist is almost impossible to stop, Johnno. We've all been subjected to the lone wolf theory for most of our lives. From Lee Harvey Oswald to Martin Bryant to Adam Lanza and many more. This type of individual represents everything that government cannot protect us from as a free and democratic society. And here's just one article I found on The Morning from The Guardian entitled "Sydney Siege Represents Some of All Australian Fears Over Terror Threats." So you know I'm not just making this up. This is what the mainstream media have been reporting. Quote, "To many Australians, regardless of the suspect's motivations, the siege was the stunt of all fears, an event that has moved from being considered the fanciful..." I can't even read this journalist's writing. Considered terrible in the post-9/11 days to almost inevitable just over a decade later. Most Australians per capita than almost any other nationality have travelled to join ISIS, a statistic that disturbs the government and preoccupies the intelligence community. Australia's secret intelligence service has devoted a large portion of its resources to staying on top of the threat in the region, but there is a nagging fear that not enough can be done despite best intentions. So, Johnno, the lone wolf is out there.
It's always a lone wolf, isn't it?
Yep, as I said, our whole life, even since the Kennedy days, has always been the lone wolf narrative.
It's the lone wolf, mate.
And as the first batch of anti-terrorism legislation was passing through the Senate and the House of Representatives, and we've discussed this on many occasions, Johnno, it did so off the fear and the subsequent suspension of rational thinking following the Newman-Hayter incident in Melbourne. That's how the first wave was passing through. When the Newman-Hayter incident happened, the rational thinking was suspended because people were afraid of the lone wolf. And as I've demonstrated on my website and we've talked about on this podcast, a timeline of fear, paranoia and media sensationalism was responsible for justifying some of the worst legislative pieces in Australian history slipping through the respective levels of government without a hint of opposition. So if you want to know what is in those, I've got an article on my website, tottnews.com, or you can head to episode 1, if you can bear with us. We're not as professional sounding as we are now, but I break them down in there, and then updates from all of that through our catalogue. So yet again, it seems more and more evident that history is set to repeat itself in the wake of this siege in Sydney. And this is something the political powers and corporations behind them have been begging for since this, quote, timeline of terror ensued. And it's not just me saying this. Australian journalist David Marr agrees in an article. He said, quote, "This will be used to justify so much. Controversial security laws the Abbott government has already passed, the metadata retention law waiting in the wings, and heaven knows what other laws may be now dreamed up in the aftermath of the shocking deaths in the Lindt Cafe." So not only have we said this, but already off the bat, this has already started to become a reality. And this is the final article I read before we get into a discussion about this. Was from ABC News entitled "Parliamentary Committee Considers Third Wave of New Security Laws as Sydney Mourns Siege Deaths." The chairman of the Federal Parliament's Joint Intelligence and Security Committee, the one that the Senate refers to improve and find new ways to strip our rights away from us, has questioned whether the government's need for further powers in the wake of the Sydney siege is justify it. The committee was currently investigating the government's third wave of new national security laws into retaining phone and computer data, as we know, for 2 years. He said it's expected that the government will consider whether its new suite of measures would be enough to prevent lone wolf attacks. So, Johnno, straight away, off the bat, they've already, by the end of the day, I found these articles, by the end of the day, they've already pushed this narrative that the lone wolf, there's a boogeyman coming to get you, and that we can't stop the lone wolf. We need to pass stronger laws on top of what we already got. What do you think of this?
Well, this was inevitable. This was always going to happen, regardless of what you think about what took place on the day. Once there was this supposed terror incident, it was always going to be the case that it would be used by the government of the day to push more draconian anti-liberty legislation. That was obvious. And as you documented on episode 1, 2, 3, 4 of this show, they've already passed 2 tranches of very draconian, supposed anti-terror legislation. It's already the case that right now in this country, you can be detained for up to 2 weeks without charge. For up to 2 weeks without charge. It's already the case that if you're out of your house, a plainclothes officer can come into your house, search whatever he wants to search, without even notifying you of it for up to 12 months. So if someone's listening to this podcast right now in their car on the way to work, it is the case that right now legally there could be a plainclothes officer jumping into your house right now, and they won't have to inform you until this time next year. These are the kind of laws that we have now, and these are the kinds of laws that were being passed earlier this year following, as you said, the Newman-Hayter incident. Now, what are they going to try and pass? Well, this metadata retention laws were the third tranche of that legislation. There's no doubt in my mind that this will be used as a pretext to pass that legislation now.
Definitely. And that, thankfully, was one that had been actually getting proper debate in the Senate, the data retention laws. It's the one that's actually been getting media coverage. It's the one that they're not being able to pass through as easily. So how ironic now that this happens all of a sudden, You showed me a screenshot before of a news program saying that...
Yeah, and I believe that screenshot was from either the Monday or the Tuesday afternoon of Sky News, and sure enough, what's the infographic underneath it? Brandis or someone had claimed, AFP had claimed more of these terror threats are stopped due to use of metadata or something along these lines.
That's trying to push.
They're not subtle about it in any way. It's so obvious what they're doing to anyone with a single functioning brain cell in their head. Sadly for you and me, Ethan, that's the minority of Australians.
It's just, and it's unbelievable. And as I've just read from those articles, it may not just stop at this, because as we've seen, they've come out and said, as I've actually got a quote here from Rupert Murdoch, if I can find it, on his Twitter account, speaking about lone wolves, he said, Australia, UK and the US likely to catch most plots. Lone wolves are the frightening danger. Now, we all know who Uncle Rupert is and how much influence he has over the media and what is force-fed subconsciously into us to believe that. And I just think it's unbelievable coming straight from his mouth saying that lone wolves are a frightening danger. And as we've said, all throughout history, lone wolves have been the danger. We can't stop lone wolves. The same excuse that they were doing for terrorism in general 10 years ago, saying we can't stop terrorism because it's not a plain suited army. It's an ideology spreading around the world. This same propaganda nonsense is just being regurgitated over and over, and increasingly more so, people are just accepting it. And it's going to be used to fly through the final waves of this anti-terrorism legislation, which is a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah, and in the movie, in the book rather, 1984 by George Orwell, there's a section where Julia says to Winston, has it ever occurred to you that all these bombs that are exploding is just the government doing that to scare us? And Winston thinks to himself, the thought had never even crossed my mind. And I think for a lot of people, the thought hasn't crossed their mind. It's the old cui bono, who benefits. I think most people are so devoid of critical thinking abilities that the thought, could this be the government benefiting from this? Do they have an interest in trying to do these kinds of things? Do they have a benefit in pushing the fear agenda? It doesn't actually cross their minds. And so when you go from incident on the Monday, Tuesday, to suddenly we need to pass this legislation, there's no critical thinking in between for most people. It's just, well, this problem, reaction, solution. We've got the problem. I'm going to have the reaction. Please, government, I want your solution. It's just so easy for them to do this kind of thing.
Yep, and straight away, and that's General Maddox from realnewsaustralia.com put up an article saying problem, reaction, solution. The Sydney Siege was the title of it, and linked to my article speaking about how Australia is increasingly becoming a draconian state through, and it gives, on that article, has a timeline of what we thought was crazy at the time. From the weeks, from the Newman Hayter incident to the passing through the Senate to all of this, the raising of the terrorism level, then statistics on terrorism and how you're more likely to die from peanut allergies than terrorism. But that's not plastered all over the news, is it, Johnno? It's just unbelievable. But speaking of the media...
A lone nut.
A lone nut. We've reached a new level.
By the way, we have got a lot of new listeners for this show. I did notice that more people are getting interested in the show thanks to the Sydney Siege, and I went on a couple of shows in America discussing the incident. And we've probably got a lot of people who are first-time listeners who are wondering, hold on, you're talking about an incident where as many as 18 people were held hostage and 2 people died or something like this. How can you be laughing? I hope that you stay tuned with us until segment 5, where we go through some little things that we've noticed that probably makes us more predisposed to finding the comedy in what took place on the Monday. And sadly, this is a podcast, so I can't show you video footage. And I'll discuss this more when we get to segment 5, Ethan. But it's interesting when you look at the police over the course of the day, which I have done, going back through the live footage right throughout the Monday, how many of the police officers seem to be laughing from time to time? So don't come at me and criticise me for having a laugh on the Sunday on this podcast. There were police on the day, a lot of them, time after time, having a bit of a joke and a laugh. Very interesting. We'll get to that when we get to segment 5, Ethan. We're still on segment 1 here, the legislation that we think is going to follow this incident on the Monday. Do you have any more to add on that topic?
No, I think I summed it up. It's just that this was something that immediately came straight after, by the end of the day, that without any of the details being released, and still the majority of the details are still not being told to us, but by the end of the day, the lone wolf narrative, just like following the September 11th attacks, within an hour the media knew it was Osama bin Laden who was responsible, before the White House even addressed saying that it was terrorists that had done this. So I just think it's incredibly interesting how by the end of the day, one of the most important things that needs to be debated, this final wave, because we've let the first 2 get through.
Well, we didn't. We should make this clear. That was the Liberal government of the day, supported by the Labor so-called opposition of the day, with token objections from the Greens, who between those 3 parties make up something like 90% of the primary vote at elections. Now, you might say, well, if 90% of people are voting for these muppets of parties, isn't it we, the people, who are responsible? Of course, in a way it is. We'll get into discussing the media and some of the influence that they've had on this event in the next segment, but when you say, hey, we've already let this happen, I don't think we have. We're doing our best, and a lot of our listeners are doing their best to get the word out. This is terrible legislation. On that note, let me just give, because we're giving context to the whole thing here. We're going to start off the show by giving context to all of this. Let's just give a bit more context on that legislation we talked about. The first bill was the National Security Legislation Amendment Bill number 1, introduced to the Senate on July 16. Its second reading was on September... The second reading is the most important one. Yeah. Was on September 23. You will find out why that's a significant date shortly. And of course, it passed both houses on October 1. Now, that's the one that allows one warrant to cover a whole network. ASIO officers have criminal and civil immunity from prosecution under special intelligence operations. Penalties for disclosing SIO information for up to 10 years jail. So someone like you or me could go to jail for up to 10 years if we report on one of these SIOs. And it also gave ASIO tasks and powers to contractors. So our CIA equivalent can now contract this work out. When I sit here and read this, I mean, it's just... This was only a few months ago, but it seems like the distant past now because so much has happened. But that was the first piece of legislation that we're talking about. And again, the second reading was on September 23. I'll come back to that date in a moment. The next day was September 24, which is when the second bill was introduced to the Senate. That was the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Foreign Fighters Bill. This is the one that made it an offence to travel to a declared area. This is the one that broadened laws from terrorist activities to terrorism, which, by the way, if the mainstream media reporting on the Monday and the Tuesday wasn't terrorism. I don't know what is. It was just terror.
Anyway.
When you go back and look at the coverage of the day, it's amazing. They use the same clips, sometimes like 15 times in the 1 hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's incredible. Like when you're sitting there in a trance, you probably don't notice it. But they are bombarding the public with these terrorising images. You want to know who the terrorists are? Just go back and watch the footage from the Monday. It's incredible stuff.
I just want to put in a good word for Johnno here. He actually physically recorded the news segments for this, and has actually watched the news to actually break this down, which we'll get into the inconsistencies. But just understand, Johnno's done the full yards for this, which should be a testament to him, because after 5 minutes of watching the news, I feel nauseous. So.
Yeah, look, we'll get to all of that later. But thanks for the kudos, I appreciate that, mate. So look, on that second bill, again, this is one that was introduced on September 24, brought into law from terrorist activities to terrorism, and allowed welfare payments to be cut off from threats, among other things. I'm just reading out some of the things that came with it. Yep. The delayed notification search warrants, the one that I mentioned earlier, after 12 months, removed the requirement to immediately notify an individual of a cancellation of their passport. So you or I might go to fly to the country tomorrow and find out their passport's been cancelled. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're going to do that. The point is they now have the powers to do that. So again, if you're listening to this podcast in the car on the way to work, remember, not only could they be in your house right now and not have to tell you for up to 12 months, but next time you go to the airport, you might not be able to get out of this country because they might have cancelled your passport without telling you. Now, that is from the second bill. The third bill that we think they're going to try and pass soon, using this incident as a pretext, is the Telecommunications Interception and Access Amendment Data Retention. It's amazing how many hyphens they use in these titles. Now, that was the one that was introduced to the House on October 30. Now, I mentioned that the first bill had its second reading on September 23, and the second bill was introduced on September 24. Why are those dates important? Well, because what happened on September 23? That was the day of Newman Hayter, who, of course, was the lone wolf down there in southeast Melbourne, down in Endeavour Hills, who supposedly tried to behead a police officer when that police officer was with a partner and both officers were armed with a gun. I mean, how stupid do they think... Okay, look, we discussed that back on like episode 3 or whatever. Go back and listen, but it's just ridiculous. So you look what happened. Hayter incident, these two bills. The third bill was already introduced. Like you said, lots of debate about it. Then we have the so-called Sydney siege. And of course, this third bill will be passed, no doubt about it. And they'll be using the Sydney siege as a way to justify ramming it through.
Unbelievable. And as you mentioned, in 10 short episodes, this is our 11th broadcast. In 10 weeks, we've gone through this entire batch of anti-terrorism legislation, Newman Hayter, the so-called Sydney siege, all of this has gone through in this short period. It really puts it into context just how fast everything is.
Yeah, well, I think our first episode was early September. I might be mistaken.
Yes.
I think episode 1 was September 5 or something like this. Here's some more context for the listeners. I know that a lot of listeners, they're eager for us to start discussing the inconsistencies of the day. We'll get to that, okay? That's going to be interesting. But the context to all of this is so important. And we have a lot of listeners who maybe aren't as aware of some of the event skeptics and some of the good work that's been done showing that certain other events have inconsistencies around them. A lot of listeners listening today, for the most part, believe the official narrative of the Monday, and that's okay. We're allowed to believe whatever we want. Regardless of what exactly happened on the Monday, what's important is what's going to happen following it.
Yeah.
And that's why we're giving this context. Now, I'll give some more context. Back on August 19 was the first ISIS so-called beheading with James Foley, right? August 21, here's what Abbott said. The beheading was truly sickening and utterly evil. This is a direct quote, by the way. It could happen in Australia if we relax our vigilance against terrorism and potential terrorism here on our shores, end quote. I'll give you another quote from the same day. Quote, this is why we need new legislation to strengthen the powers of our security agencies to make it easier to detain and jail people, and why we also need legislation to ensure that the police and other security agencies continue to have access to telecommunications data, end quote.
Unbelievable.
August 19, James Foley. August 21, Abbott comes out and makes those statements. September 9, the ASIO chief tells the ABC that they are considering raising the terror threat level to high, and also that he was retiring shortly after. On September 11, terror threat level was raised to high, which means by their own definition that an attack is likely. Abbott said, quote, we do have intelligence that there are people with the intent and capability to mount attacks, end quote. And this is the first time that the threat level had been raised in Australia since 2002. Then on September 18, there were those massive terror raids, something like 800 officers storming houses in Brisbane and Sydney, 15 people arrested at the time. Subsequent to that, only one person still has any terrorism-related charges hanging over their heads following that, and that is because they received a phone call from someone who allegedly said you should behead somebody. Remember that incident?
Yes.
September 22, we had the Abbott speech, which I've got somewhere around here. I've mixed up my notes. Well, look, it was just another Abbott speech crapping on about, it could happen here, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, we had the September 23 Newman Hayter incident and everything that we've already spoken about. So you can see this has been a full court press.
Absolutely.
Terrorist incidents and media reactions and government legislation, the three go hand in hand.
And that's, exactly. And that's what I just, tried to add a context to, is that we've just shown you what they've done. Now they're going to do it again. They're already looking to do it once again and go right around the merry-go-round once again to pass even more draconian measures to take more civil liberties away from us. And this is something that should concern every single critically thinking Australian citizen out there, anyone that has a functioning brain to question the system.
Yeah, and of course, I follow what happens overseas, and it's amazing the similarities. We've got a lot of Canadian listeners, so hi to all of those people. Just for comparison, let's look at what's been happening in Canada in the last few months. On August 19, as I said, there was the James Foley beheading video that got coverage all over the Western world and the Five Eyes countries. On September 5, their Liberal Party called for a full-scale inquiry into ISIS. On October 8, their CSIS, which is like their ASIO, I suppose, director warns that the ISIS threat was real but not imminent. On October 15, the government announced that it would soon table a new CSIS bill, giving their intelligence agencies more powers. On October 17, their terror threat level was raised. That's an internal terror threat level over there, I think. On October 20, they had that supposed Rulo hit and run, where he, for some reason, supposedly hit and run a couple of, I think it might have been mounted police or, government police or whatever, something like this. On October 21, 6 of their fighter jets departed for Kuwait, and October 22, they had that Zihaf Bibo incident where he supposedly stormed into Canadian Parliament. So you can see it's just the same over there in Canada. They're having terror incidents. The government is saying it's getting very scary. We need to give the government more powers. It's not just happening here, it's happening in Canada as well. And when you look at the similarities between that, like in my notes here, I've made direct comparisons to those. To the same things happened, just with different names on slightly different dates, but in the exact same order. Yep. It's incredible when you see it.
It's absolutely incredible. It could drive you up the wall if you don't actually sit back and try to disconnect yourself from the matrix that we are living in. But in my research for the documentary that I'm going to film, exposing how they're coming for free speech and to get anyone that's a critical thinker, it's more and more increasingly evident that on a global scale, this is what's happening. On a global scale, it's all happening, and it seems like Australia has been the breeding ground for this to test it, because of the Canadian incidents happened after Newman Hayter, after they saw how well it worked, after they saw how well these legislations got through. All of a sudden, in Canada, it happens. And we discussed that on the show, saying, well, look, it's now expanding globally. They're using us as a blueprint for this. It's absolutely amazing when you sit back and look at it and how easily this is all playing out right in front of our eyes.
It's incredible stuff. So that's the context, okay? Now we've given the context of what's been happening this year in this country and to an extent abroad as well. Now we can get into discussing the incident itself and the coverage on the day. So the second sub-segment, I'm saying that word better now. I was mumbling at the start, wasn't I? Second sub-segment of today, and that's the coverage of the incident on the day. Now my question to you, Ethan, is when did you first hear about this Sydney siege? What was the...
I was up early that day, so I heard it as soon as it came on as breaking news.
Oh, really?
So from straight, yeah.
You actually watched the news?
Yeah, the TV is on in the background.
Busted!
I'm busted. That's it. It was good while it lasted 11 episodes.
All right, well, I was sitting at my computer on the... I didn't have work the week just gone. I'm on holidays now, so it's kind of... The timing kind of worked out all right in that sense. So I was at home on the computer, probably just reading Zero Hedge or doing whatever I do. I got a text message from a guy saying, hey, have you seen what's happening in Sydney? Jumped on the net. Sure enough, it was going down. And I think this was about 10:30 or 11. I can't remember. I can check the text. So I went down, chucked the TV on straight. I was like, okay, this is going to be huge. Just from as soon as you turn on the TV, you could see this is going to be a huge media event. No question about it. So I chucked the PVR on and I started recording. I've got footage from that day the whole way through, which I've been going through and analysing, as you mentioned. And I've got my little dossier here of the little notes that I made. Now, for the benefit of the audience, I'm not going to sit here and go through all of the notes. But what is interesting is when I go back and read all the little things I noticed, the number of times that they repeated the same phrases. Shocking, terrifying, tense, whatever. And one of the blokes in the comments section, who was it? One of the blokes in the comments, sorry Matt, I can't remember who it was who said it, that he noticed the words shocking and chilling being used over and over. And they were, not just on the ABC, but on Channel 7 and Channel 9 as well. They were using these same words. Did you happen to notice this when you were watching?
Absolutely. And I made a joke of it online, saying I posted a photo of Santa being kidnapped by ISIS, saying that these dastardly terrorists have gone too far. Stay tuned for more of this. And then I put like 100 different hyphens saying shocking, unbelievable, tragic, all of the words. And then hyphen, can't think of any more sensationalist words, coverage tonight on Murdoch TV. So that just sums up my experiences with the day, because it was just the dragged on absolute just nonsense analysis and discussion, speculating like this is absolute rubbish journalism. This should not be allowed on TV.
You know what was interesting was they had all these talking heads on, from this university, this university. Since when are all these terrorism experts, by the way? Like when did this become a thing that so many people are doing? But anyway, they had all of these different experts on, security experts, blah, 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 and they were all saying, well, we can't say it is terrorism, but we're pretty sure it's terrorism. The flag gives it away. And then at like the 7 p.m. news bulletin, they actually had the temerity to say, there's no suggestion that this is related to terrorism. I'm going to put together a few videos so people can see these massive contrasts on the day, the reporting on the day, between what they would say in one breath and what they would say in the next. They were trying to ram this home as terrorism right from the start. They just did it with doublespeak, classic doublespeak.
Absolutely. And when we actually start getting right into the media discussion, I'll go over the Daily Telegraph's coverage of that. But immediately there was journalists on Twitter, and journalists do Twitter updates, which is more breaking news type-ish than a more comprehensive report. It says coming soon. It's just updates with hashtags and whatnot. And almost 9 out of 10 of the journalists had to increasingly correct themselves because they were getting details wrong because of these assumptions, all of these baseless assumptions that were going on all day, saying that this was an ISIS flag, that ISIS were responsible for this attack, ISIS have invaded Sydney. All of this rubbish journalism had to be corrected all day. And no one's been held accountable for that as of yet. And it just went on all day. And I watch the mainstream media to analyse it. I don't get indoctrinated by it and sit there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You were sitting there watching the news.
Trying to defend myself right now. But no, it's for analysis, and that's why I was watching it for most of the day, this news coverage, but it just got overwhelming because it was the same crap on every single television station.
So we didn't get a chance before the show to discuss this, so literally I'm just learning this for the first time, but you were actually watching the news as they cut to this incident.
Yeah.
Do you remember how they framed it at the time? Because look, I've got the video footage, like I said, from about 10:30 or 11 or whatever. I don't actually have the footage of it when it first broke, so I don't actually know how they broke the news at the time. Do you remember what they...
They were pretty aggressive with it. Immediately off the bat, they were saying that that hostages have been taken in the Lint Cafe, and a suspected preacher or something like that has been, or something. I can't remember what it was. It had something to do with pushing the notion that there was a Muslim person that had taken these Lint people hostages, but it hadn't been confirmed yet. It was just assumptions based on rubbish witness testimonies that were on the ground. They were on the ground with the TV cameras and everything saying, so what's going on here? Have you seen what's happening? And just talking to every Joe Schmo on the street. And then as the day went on, more details came.
You know what was interesting was how many people they interviewed. This is the ABC coverage. How many people were either just about to go and get a Lint Cafe chocolate, or how many people had just come from the Lint Cafe chocolate, or how many people would usually be there, but today they got their But by the end of this week, there'll be about 50,000 people who were almost there at the time. If he had just walked in a few minutes earlier, he could have got the place with 50,000 hostages. Cause
it's the same with the people that have been laying the flowers out, and we'll get into that in the last segment, but just the increasingly people that don't know them that are crying because the media have emotionally attached them to it. Through emotive linguistics and pattern segments and all of these key journalism terms that they've been using, they've drawn these people in. The same they did with the Philip Hughes case.
Absolutely.
The same they do every single time is to get people emotional straight away at the start of the program and drag them on all day.
Yeah, they use specific terms for this reason. They repeat them over and over again. They know that most people are very simple and constant repetition of words will work. They show the same clips over and over and over and over and over and over again, time and time again. So you get this image drilled into your head. And when that young Asian girl ran out and then the police kind of, grabbed her by the arm, whatever, as soon as I saw that, because I was watching live by that stage, as soon as I saw that, I thought, that's going to be a front page photo. What I didn't realise was it'd be a front page photo on every newspaper in Sydney the next day. Sydney has 2 newspapers. They've got the Daily Telegraph and the Sydney Morning Herald. Both of them ran with that photo as their big front page photo, as did the Australian Financial Review and the Australian. All 4 of them ran, and they're national newspapers obviously, all 4 of them ran with that exact photo. And the moment I saw it, I thought, there's their money shot right there. The girl being saved by the police officer. And yet when you watch the clip closely, it almost looks like she's trying to beat the guy off her. But and of course, how was that police officer dressed? Well, he was decked out in all the tactical gear, to the point where now any of the drones who are programmed by television, because of course we are surrounded in every direction by people who are programmed by television. That's its entire purpose. Mm-hmm. Those people who are plugged into the programming, who believe all of this stuff, a lot of them now are at the point where probably they would prefer that their local police were dressed like that. Like that's where they're at right now.
Absolutely.
These friendly, machine gun, big boot wearing, balaclava wearing, kitted out dudes. They're the kind of police that they would want because, hey, look how much they protect you. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah,
it's incredible stuff. So by early afternoon, everyone knew about this. It was all over the news. All 7, 9 and 10 were all running. 7, 9 and the ABC were definitely running live coverage, as was Sky News, no doubt about it. I'm pretty sure 10 were as well. So you had complete coverage.
Yep.
All over the newspapers, there's no way you could miss it. And of course, that coverage continued right throughout the evening. Yeah. Now, were you watching live the whole time?
Not the whole time. As I mentioned, I got sick of it and had to just go to online news where I can read and actually not have to listen to the same monotone vocals and the same, just ways that the journalists have to communicate and dumb down the population through it. The way that they speak, the way that it just drags on. Every channel you see, it's the same pitches of the voice, up and down and up and down. And all of this is what you learn. This is what I learned when I was being trained to be a journalist. This is what is being taught. So when you actually understand that and disconnect yourself from it, it's just unbearable. But I turned it off, but it led all the way into the morning to the conclusion. It went all the way to the conclusion there, and once we get into the media discussion, we'll talk about Rupert Murdoch's congratulations text to the Daily Telegraph for being the only, quote, news outlet that got it. But it just went all day, and they just dragged it on and on and on.
Yeah, and I know that with Channel 7's coverage, they cut out at midnight, I think Brisbane time, which might have been 1 a.m. Sydney time, or 11 p.m. here and midnight there or whatever. So an hour or 2 before the incident finished. Yeah. But 9 was still covering it live right through. So I was watching it, and I'd already begun doing my research by then. I thought I'm going to start looking into who this man Morris character is and what's his background and all the rest of it. And so I was getting pretty tired and I was getting ready to go to bed because I thought this will probably resolve itself overnight, but I'm not going to stay up until 4 or 5, I don't feel like starting my holidays, staying up until 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever. So just as I was getting ready to go to bed, that's when I saw on one of the forums that I was following to find out what was happening, someone said, stuff's going down. So I went downstairs. The PVR was still recording, so the TV was on, and sure enough, that's when this whole incident sort of came to its conclusion, if you like. Yep. Were you watching live at the time?
I was watching it live online.
Yep.
There was online streaming of it on news websites, so I was watching it live at the time, just not knowing what the hell was going on. Because, during the day, Queensland police were put out onto the streets as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was starting to think, I've got to watch this because if Queensland police are coming on the street in all of this, this could be something big.
Yeah, yep.
So I had to be there, despite all of my opposition to the mainstream media. I had to be there, but I watched it live streaming, and it was just. We'll get into more of a discussion. But.
And obviously with these events, you only have to give it a day or a week, whatever, and all of a sudden everyone was watching it live. Everyone was up all night. So the numbers will be exaggerated, but at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that perhaps 1 million Australians really were watching this live. Like a large percentage of the Australian population were watching this live and believing every second of it was 100% legitimate. And we'll get later in the show into discussion about why that might not be the best way to see things. But these images were imprinted into people's minds live. It happened at 2 o'clock, so it was late enough that the crowd had all dispersed. There was nobody there watching with their own eyes live, but a lot of people were at home tweeting about it, posting about it on forums, watching their live feeds on the computer, on TV. This is an event that is burned into a lot of people's brains.
Yeah, as it happens.
As it happens.
So you don't have a chance to, analyse it from a third person perspective. Looking back on it retrospectively, you're analysing it as it's going.
Yeah, and there's that old adage, it's easier to fool a man than to convince a man that he's been fooled. In other words, get your narrative into someone's mind first, and it's much less likely that another narrative will take over. So the fact that so many people watched for hours, and many people even watched right through to the 2 o'clock conclusion, I would put to you that most people who watched it live, who were part of the programming, will never, there'll be no undoing what they've seen that's now been blasted into their mind, because it was complete and utter coverage all day.
Too strong.
Nothing else. Nothing else is going to get through. Now, that provides a nice little segue into our third sub-segment. I'm being careful how I say that after the start of the show.
Before we do, I just wanted to read out my segment from...
by all means, go for it.
Just to continue on, because I really want to get stuck into the Daily Telegraph for their coverage that they did. It was absolutely revolting, and what I wrote in this was, of course, when a major event happens in Australia and around the world, Murdoch's empire is first on the scene with all the latest comprehensive news and updates. And this event was no different. A typical display of dragged-out, baseless discussion dominated our television sets and print publications as the happenings inside the cafe were unfolding, with many journalists, as I said, having to retract from absurd claims. Now, I'll put a link to this in the info box when we upload the official audio, but did you see the front page of the Daily Telegraph? I posted on the TOTT News Facebook page, where the Daily Telegraph blatantly and appallingly stated that on the front page they had the victims with their hands on the window, and all of it said was IS for the Islamic State, and then in big bold letters said Death Cult CBD attack, and that was the edition that had come out that day. And this was just absolutely, when they had to retract and say that this wasn't an ISIS flag, that this wasn't what had been portrayed by the media, it's too late. Where is the accountability for this? I just think it was absolutely appalling, because it doesn't matter how much you retract. Once you've already got that into the subconscious of the people, once they see big bold letterings, this advertisement and the designs of these pages are for a reason. Once you see the big bold text saying a death cult has attacked the CBD and IS are responsible and there's an IS flag, people are just going to believe that. That's because they've read it in the newspaper.
Absolutely.
And so I said the blatant destruction of credible journalism, coupled with an astronomical increase in advertising revenue as a result. That's why they continue this all day, because people are tuned in. You can raise revenue for advertising. All the companies want to get in at the prime time when you go to ad breaks. Can only be exemplified by the masters that are dictating the destruction itself. I'm speaking of the editors who, calculated in their methods, allow this almost laughable excuse of pure satire to be published for the world to see. And it is the editors that are allowing this to be happening. If any editor that I've ever worked for, if I pitched that to them, I'd be shut down immediately with, you can't do that. We have journalism ethics. We're supposed to follow a code of conduct. You can't just report blatant lies. But yet, here's the Daily Telegraph on the front page, as we've seen all throughout the year with the Courier Mail, absolutely exaggerating. Now, for those who aren't aware, the Daily Telegraph was Uncle Murdoch's one of his flagship publications in Australia, have been responsible for banning unvaccinated children from daycare centres in New South Wales and many other unbiased, objective endeavours of journalism practice, and I could not say that while keeping a straight face. Perhaps a better representation of tasteless evil associated with generating revenue from the emotions of the public can be found in the response to the coverage by Rupert Murdoch himself. Now, he's obviously a $13 billion mogul who owns newspapers all around the world, Uncle Rupert Murdoch. Now, here's what he said, and it wasn't an expression of condolence or empathy to the so-called victims or any of the event at all. What he said was, Australia gets a wake-up call with Sydney terror. Only Daily Telegraph caught the bloody outcome at 2 a.m. Congrats. So he's congratulating the Daily Mail for capturing an outcome where supposedly 2 people were shot dead, and instead of suggesting that there was that instead of offering a hint of condolence, rather, he just comes out and congratulates his newspaper for being there, for getting all of this sensationalist coverage all day and then doing it. I just thought that was absolutely appalling, and I had to bring it up just to blast him, Johnno.
Yeah, no one's a big fan of Uncle Rupert. I think we're preaching to the converted there. Now, that makes a very poor segue to my next segment. So we're going to go on to the other issues that we drowned out. Now, on the Sunday, our government signed an $11 billion deal with Telstra to purchase their copper and pay TV and HFC networks for the National Broadband Network. And it was announced that Telstra would receive $18 billion from taxpayers over the next 8 years. Now, for a country of 24 million people, with a budget, well, we'll get to the budget deficit in a moment, but with a budget deficit that's already at something like $40 billion, that's a huge amount of money. Especially, and I'll give some context for our overseas listeners, the National Broadband Network was a key election issue for 2 elections, 2010 and 2013, and one of the things that the then opposition, Abbott opposition, campaigned on was the NBN's going to be too expensive, not worth the money, etc., etc., etc. They were also campaigning on how the budget was too bloated, we were in too much debt, all of these things. It was a key part of their election platform. Then on the Sunday it's announced, well, actually, we're going to have to stick to the $11 billion deal that was originally signed. We can't stop it. We're going to go ahead with it. We're going to give $11 billion of taxpayers' money to Telstra. Bear in mind, of course, that Telstra used to be Telecom, was a nationally owned telecom company. So basically, back in the mid-90s, they sold Telecom, which we now know as Telstra. Now Australians don't own Telecom anymore. At least they don't own it as a government entity. Now some private shareholders own it. Now we're going to give that same group of people $11 billion of taxpayers' money for something that the current government had campaigned about being too expensive, and the current government had said that we're in too much debt to begin with. So this was huge news on the Sunday, and should have, I think, in a more normal world, in a more normal week, that should be news for days.
Absolutely.
A big public conversation. Hold on, this is billions of dollars that we don't have. That was what happened on the Sunday. Then, of course, on the Monday, we had the incident that we're discussing now, the Sydney siege, but a couple of other things also happened on that Monday. We had the Craig Thompson court case, where he was basically found not guilty of the vast majority of the charges that had been put against him. Now, the reason why he is significant is that after 2010, the then Labor government were only able to form government with a one-person majority by getting the Greens with them. It was a minority government, thanks to the support of one Greens member. In other words, they couldn't afford to lose a single MP, or else they'd have to call for a new election, which is exactly what old mate Uncle Rupert's newspapers wanted, and of course what the opposition wanted, because everybody hated the government. So they campaigned on this relentlessly. Craig Thompson's a crook. Craig Thompson's a crook. He stole this money from the union. He used escorts. All of these things, right? Yep. Massive public witch hunt against the guy. Now let me say from the start, I don't know the guy. And if he was a union official, he probably is corrupt. They all are. So this isn't about defending the dude. But the reality is that a couple of years ago, we were subjected to daily stories and headlines and articles. Thompson's a crook. Thompson's a crook. You have to sack him. You have to sack him. Of course, the government couldn't afford to sack him because then they would lose government, right? Yep. Huge issue. So then on the Monday just gone, the same Monday as the Sydney siege, it's announced that he's been found not guilty of the vast majority of the charges that were against him, and the charges that he was found guilty of were only theft from the union, and even then they amounted to less than $5,000 total. Now, if you were to compare that to what we were bombarded with for weeks and probably months back a couple of years ago, you can see the massive disparity there. Probably not the kind of story that you would want on the front pages if you were the Liberal government, fortunately for them, it wasn't on the front pages. In fact, I'd be surprised if many Australians could even tell you anything about the Monday Craig Thompson court case, because it simply got almost no coverage. That was one of the things that happened on the Monday. Of course, we also had the budget mid-year economic fiscal outlook. Now, Australia, like most countries, all I would guess, has their yearly budget. Once a year, the government, the finance minister and the treasurer announce what the budget's going to be for the year, right? How much debt we're in, or how much debt we're going to be in, what kind of things we're going to be spending on, etc. Of course, every other 6 months, we have the mid-year economic fiscal outlook, which is where they update the budget. It's basically a budget update. It's a significant thing. Of course, remember that this government got in largely campaigning on the country being in too much debt, too much deficit. They were going to fix it. So what do they announce at their budget mid-year economic fiscal outlook? Well, the forecasted deficit has increased $10 billion in 6 months to $40 billion. That's since May. In other words, in May, they were forecasting a budget deficit of $30 billion. Now they're forecasting a budget deficit of $40 billion. So in the space of 6 months, things have gotten so bad here in this country economically that we're now $10 billion, the government's going to be $10 billion further in deficit just for this year. That is mammoth news. That's incredible
Absolutely.
news. Look, putting aside the fact that they campaign on reducing the deficit, for any government of any colour, of any stripes, $10 billion extra in the deficit in the space of 6 months, that's incredible stuff. For this government to have to announce that, that's doubly incredible. And of course, that update was supposed to be on the Monday. Now, there was speculation they weren't going to go ahead with the mid-year economic fiscal outlook because the Sydney siege had begun before the MyEFA was meant to be released. But they went ahead with it anyway, and I was watching it live. And what did Joe Hockey, the Treasurer, say at the start? We're going to go ahead with it. Our thoughts are with the people of the Sydney siege. We're going to go ahead with MyEFO, but because of the circumstances, we're going to keep the questions to a minimum. I'm paraphrasing, but that is seriously what he said. And of course, that's what happened. There was very little analysis of it because everybody was busy looking at the Sydney siege. So, again, by amazing coincidence, the government of the day happens to benefit from the Sydney siege taking place. There was one more thing that also happened on the Monday. Now, about 3 or 4 episodes ago, I mentioned how the East-West link down in Melbourne, this massive multi-billion-dollar road infrastructure project, which could never be justified by a business case. They want to build a massive tunnel under the city. It's just going to benefit the unions who build it and the financiers who finance it. The big end of town. Yep. They're the only people who are going to be benefited by this. That's obvious. That's why the previous government never released a business case on it, because there is no business case for it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not a good one. Well, of course, they were voted out a couple of weeks ago, and the new government did release the internal documents on this project and why they want to scrap it, because it turns out that it's going to take something like 50 or 60 years, even on positive projections, just to pay the tunnel back before you even start making money on optimistic projections. And of course, their projections never come in. So basically, this was a road to nowhere. You know what I mean? Yeah. That just happened to be released on the Monday as well. So there's Craig Thompson incident, the NBN from the day before, the East-West link update, and of course the Big Daddy, the MyEFO update, all within the space of 24 hours, leading up to or on the day of the Sydney siege. Ethan, you tell me, is that a coincidence?
Oh, it's a coincidence, Johnno. What are you talking about? Why are we even doing this sub-segment? Everything happens for a reason. But I focus mainly on the budget side of it in my article, and I discovered that when they revealed the cuts that they're going to do, it was revealed that 16,500 people are going to lose their jobs because of this. 16,500 people are going to lose their jobs in cuts in their vain attempt to deliver a surplus that they never will. Let's face it, they're never going to. When it's not designed,
this country is never going back into surplus. That's the point.
That's
here.
Right, mathematically,
Never.
It's not designed.
No,
they don't want it.
Exactly.
So, and it was just unbelievable. And I don't have the list in front of me because it took up a number of pages to print out. But on my article about the Sydney siege on tottnews.com, I listed all of the departments and government funded things that are going to be cut, and there's a solid list of about 50 there, approximately 50, probably more, of just organisations that are going to get cut, their money cut, and as a result, 16,500 people are going to lose their jobs. And as you said, $40 billion, which was more than $10 billion that they forecasted in May. In May, they forecasted $30 billion, and we've gone $10 billion over that in that time, and it's just unbelievable. But just how ironic it is that it has to happen during the day that Martin Place gets taken.
Yeah, and these things are related, right? So you've got all these people getting laid off because the budget can't afford to keep the public servants, okay?
Yep.
At the same time, we're giving $11 billion to Telstra to buy, among other things, their pay TV and HFC networks. Now, who is the monopoly pay TV platform in Australia? Foxtel. Now, who is a large shareholder in Foxtel?
Rupert Murdoch.
Old Uncle Rupert. It's interesting, isn't it?
It's all a coincidence, I'm telling you, Johnno.
All a big coincidence. So I've given the background of those four things: Thomson, MyEFO, East West Link, NBN, all within 24 hours of the Sydney siege. That was what really perked my interest in all of this at the time. I thought to myself, hold on, this is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And we'll leave that conversation there. Now, that's the third sub-segment. In a couple of segments, we're going to get to what all the listeners are waiting for, which is some of the information that we found out about the day by going back through the coverage and what have you. We'll get to that. But there's one more thing, just to change pace a little bit, that I wanted to discuss from the Sydney siege before we get into the big conversation. And that was a girl named Tessa Kum. Now, a lot of the Australian listeners will know very well that there was a hashtag going around called I'll Ride With You. So here's a background for the international listeners who might not be familiar. Shortly after this incident got, the widespread coverage, it was on every channel. So sometime in the afternoon, a hashtag began to circulate, and the hashtag was I'll Ride With You. And the basic idea was that people would show support for the Muslim community by saying, hey, we don't blame you for what's happening in the Sydney Link Cafe, so we're going to ride buses with you to make you feel safe. That was the general idea. And what I'll do is I'll read out an article that probably gives the background better than I just did, just for the listeners who aren't familiar, because look, everyone in Australia knows about this hashtag. It was everywhere. But just for people who might not be familiar, here's an article from the ABC. Inspired by other acts of generosity that she'd read about on social media, Tessa Kum invited anyone wearing religious attire who was afraid for their safety to ride alongside her on public transport. In an emotional interview, she spoke with Ellen Fanning about the success of her hashtag, I'll Ride With You. So that's just from an ABC article. I thought that'll give the basic background. So on the Monday, I thought to myself, before it was time to start going through, and when the incident was still on, I didn't go back through what I'd already recorded. I've been doing that subsequently. On the Monday, I was just going through all the names that came up as they came up. So I thought I'd look into this Tessa Kum character, and what do you know? I found her blog. Her blog is called Silence Without. And I found a post from about a month ago, and I'm going to read out a short passage from it. Now, it isn't a short, it's a lengthy passage, but relative to the article, this is just an excerpt, okay? I'm going to read this out, so listeners, please bear with me here. This is a direct quote. Again, this is from the girl who started the hashtag that then spread throughout Australia and made big news, showing solidarity with the Muslims. Because, hey, they're all scared that us, white people are going to get angry at them and attack them. And the news were even saying that. I even saw a couple of talking heads on the news, the live coverage while this was going, saying that we've heard reports of Muslims being attacked. They actually said that. And like I said, I've got this all recorded. This will all be up on YouTube within a week or two. But anyway, that was the story. So let's read a passage from Tessa Kum's blog, shall we? Quote, "None of us can take a break from not being white. You, white person, with all your supposed good intentions, will never let us, either because you're actively racist but with too delicate an ego to ever do anything about your racism except cry about the mean people of colour, or willing to remain silent and let us carry on without support. You've already won. You won centuries ago when you left Europe and decided to crush the rest of the world. Conquer, colonise, crush. Centuries this has gone on. You have centuries of victory and triumph. You've won again. You've succeeded in driving people of colour from the scene. You succeeded in driving me and others from the internet. You've wrenched open schisms between people of colour, which will take years of hard work to heal, if they heal at all. We're diverse. We're not monolith. We're divided, and you will always ensure that remains so. What does this do to a person? How does all this shape the heart that endures it? From this I have learned about hate. Hate, like anger, is a poison for me. And so I've worked on myself hard to ensure I'm not attracted to the philosophies and perspectives of hate. But from watching all of you, I'm learning about hate. My privilege is being born and living in a Western country with a decent income. End quote. I'll just interrupt there. Listeners, thanks for bearing with me, but this is important. I'm almost done here. Just let me scroll down on my computer here. I'll get back to that. Quote, my privilege is being born in and living in a Western country with a decent income. My privilege is being ambiguous in my physicality, as it's not easy to identify with which other I am. Most people are hesitant to voice what they know to be racist arse opinions around me. The discrimination and bigotry I experience is largely unconscious and insidious, and in fact not grounded in hate at all. I'm fortunate, very fortunate. I don't feel hated as a woman of colour. Hate implies that the hater believes the target of their hate to have some sort of power or control. No, as a woman of colour, I feel cheap. Not worth as much to you, white person, as your fellow white people. I'm learning about hate because I am coming to hate you, white person. You have all the control, all the power, all the privilege, and there is nothing holding you accountable. I hate the double standards and hypocrisy you display, the rank dishonesty of your conduct. I hate that you can harm us when we cannot harm you. I hate that you have actually impacted on careers, multiple and even directly, with hate that you have actually impacted on careers. Sorry, I stuffed that bit up. Multiple and even directly with your hypocrisy. I hate that you're so dominant in the publishing industry that there's very few avenues I'd consider safe to even submit to now. I hate what you have done to people of colour I don't know. I hate what you have done to people of colour I do know. I hate what you have done to me and I was not involved. End quote. Now, again, apologies for mishmashing that quote a little bit a couple of times there. I'm trying to read from a computer that's 90 degrees to my right. But the point is that what you just heard, and listeners, thanks for your patience, was a direct quote from Tessa Kum's blog about how much she hates white people. She's the person who started a hashtag that was used allegedly to build solidarity amongst people. Ethan, what do you think of that?
Unbelievable. That's the first time I've heard that.
Yep.
I've seen that. That's just unbelievable. Was that taken from the Indigenous speakers that were at the G20? Or?
For people who are new to the show, on the Australian Roundtable, we covered the G20 live on the Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and we noted that there was a lot of divisive speakers on the day who happened to be non-white people hating on white people, and I think they'd be good friends with Tessa. I think they'd get along well.
Oh, man. But it doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't, because when you follow the trail of anything, any movement that's started, anything that tries to show that there's positivity or tries to show that there's unity, more often than not you can see that it's controlled at the highest levels, or if it's not, then you follow the trail to see that the people that are responsible for it don't believe in the message at all and are completely being hypocrites when they try to do this, and they're only out for their self-centered egos. And that's just, if that is her blog, then that's just unbelievable.
Well, obviously, you haven't had a chance to verify for yourself that that is the blog, so I appreciate your skepticism. When I read that, I thought, this can't be.
Yeah.
This is way over the top. So I did my double checking, and sure enough, that is, I'm 99.9% certain that is the same Tessa Kum, because she puts her photo on her blog, and it matches up with other photos that I've seen relating to this I'll ride with you thing. So, yeah, that's the same Tessa Kum.
Yeah.
That's what she had. And for the listeners, yes, that was a long passage that I read out, but that's only a small part of that blog. It's a 9,000-word diatribe against pretty much every person of white skin, anyone that she feels aggrieved by, etc. Now, the point that I always make to people is, if you're genuinely against racism, if you genuinely are, you're against racism of all types.
Yeah.
You don't pick and choose. If you
That's right.
genuinely think that it's wrong to hate on one group of people just because of their skin colour, then that includes if their skin colour is white. And we're seeing this more and more in this country and other Western countries, that it's becoming okay and cool, not just to hate on white people, but to teach hate people to hate on themselves.
That's
to
right.
blame themselves for the problems and all the issues that are alleged to have been caused by white people, even if you subscribe to the notion that the white settlers of this country did terrible things. And I'm not here to debate whether that's right or wrong, and Lindsay isn't here to pull me into line. It wasn't me who did that. It wasn't you who did that, Ethan. It wasn't any people, white or otherwise, listening right now who were responsible for colonisation. We just happen to have been born here. You know what I mean? That's the reality. And people might say, oh, you should leave the country. Well, where would a white person go exactly? Yeah. Every single white Western nation is being flooded with immigrants, and the reason that they're being given for that is that, oh, well, you colonised their countries. Now it's okay for them to come and colonise you. So where exactly, to avoid people like Tessa Kum getting stuck into us, where exactly are white people supposed to go?
That's right. And just to reiterate for our listeners, all of these links will be available at ausroundtable.com, which will be linked in the description.
Yeah, that's right.
We're going to put all our links up. Just for those that have tuned in late to understand that everything that we're going to be talking about, always be skeptic of, and always do the research for yourself, and then
and that's the point that we always make, Ethan, is we present this information, and not only do we provide links for people to check for themselves, we encourage it for a couple of good reasons. The first reason is that if you do your own research, you're more likely to believe whatever you find. If I sit here and say that Tessa Kum wrote that, yeah, maybe you believe Johnno on the Roundtable, but if you check out her blog for yourself, you see that the photo matches the other photos, that this is the same person, you read this hate-filled diatribe, that's when you'll come to understand what we're dealing with here. So I encourage that people do their own research for their own learning benefits, but also to help us. Hey, we're doing a 90-minute podcast every week, or a 2-hour podcast sometimes. Every now and then we're going to make a mistake. The easiest way for us to fix that is for people who notice it just to point it out. You know what I mean? We're just humans, we're just like anyone. We're occasionally going to make mistakes, and when we do, if one of you guys pulls us up for it, we appreciate it. So please, go and check ausroundtable.com, check all of the links that I provide. I will provide a link to Tessa Kum's blog, so she's about to get a massive spike in her readership.
Blog spot statistics going through the roof.
Yeah, and I know that her blog doesn't have a lot of blogs don't have many readers. I mean, that's no slight against her or her writing. Most blogs don't have that many readers. Yeah. And I did check her other posts as well, and there's so... The poor girl, can I say... I wouldn't want any of our listeners to go to her blog and start writing hateful things towards her, because the more of her writing that you read, the more you can see that she's a troubled young woman. And as we were discussing last week on our segment about feminism, unfortunately, this whole politically correct, there's no such thing as gender, this cultural Marxism that we're indoctrinating young people with, it is leading to a lot of confused young individuals out there. And this poor young girl has identified white people as her enemy when really... she and I have the same enemy. She just doesn't realise who her enemies are yet. She doesn't realise that she's fighting their battle. Yeah. She doesn't realise that she's taking part in a divisive strategy that's working so long as people like her buy into it. Now, you and I can see what they're doing. There's no need for us to start hating on Tessa. I think that young girl, if anything, she just needs some support. You know what I mean? You read her diatribes. That girl needs support. The reason why I bring all of this up is more to talk about the media narrative. The media narrative say, the Muslims are being attacked, they're being attacked. Where's the evidence for that? There is none. They need to have people ride with them on buses to make them feel safe because, hey, all the Aussies are out to get them. All the Aussies are racist. Yeah. Well, show me these racist Aussies.
That's right.
Because I can show you a racist Aussie. Her name is Tessa Kum, and you're promoting her as being for inclusion and diversity.
Well, that's one of the main things that stuck out to me when I said it. It pushes the notion that Australia is Islamophobic from the get-go. Yeah. Where it's pushing that notion that we all hate Muslims. Yeah. And this is to break the mold, when you can see that it's the complete opposite. People are generally like that. From my experience, from what I've seen from friends that I have that are of Muslim faith, most people, it's only the people that are programmed by the mainstream media and everything that think that every Muslim is a terrorist, which has been programmed for the last 10 years and above.
Yep.
But this hashtag pushes the notion, and it's all over the world. How great this is that Australia is standing together during this and everything. And that's what we should do all the time. This hashtag is divisive in itself, but it's divisive the other way by saying that there is Islamophobia in Australia and we're breaking that. That's divisive as well. That's the exact same.
You're 100% right. And look, no sane person is disputing the fact that racism exists in Australia. The problem is that there are people who think they're sane, who seem to dispute that it happens elsewhere. Go anywhere in the world and you will find racism. Now, you can argue that that's nature and that humans are naturally predisposed to preferring people who look like them, and many studies do show that, which means that they might be more likely to feel negative feelings towards other people, especially if they feel that those other people don't belong in the same land. You can argue that we're naturally predisposed to feeling that way. You can also argue that it's a nurture thing, a cultural thing, and that, hey, if we brainwash the kids enough, they'll never, treat other people differently based on looks. You can argue all of that. I'm not here to have that nature-nurture debate. The reality is that there are people who are racist in every country, but it doesn't follow from that just because one guy in the Link Cafe happens to supposedly be a Muslim carrying out a supposed terrorist attack, it doesn't follow from that there's a whole bunch of people out there in Australia just waiting to get their hands on Muslims. That's an utterly absurd notion. It's utterly absurd. Absolutely. It's every bit as absurd as that blog post that I just read out. Now, that's enough from me on Tessa Kum and her completely racist, anti-white rhetoric. Now it's time to move on, Ethan, to the segment that I know that all of our listeners have been looking forward to, and that is discussing some of the many inconsistencies from the official narrative of what happened on the Monday through Tuesday. And I want to make a point. We were up to something like 19 or 20 people watching live earlier on. So thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. For all the people in the chat box, we appreciate the comments. There's been some really good ones. I know you've all been looking forward to this one. We're going to discuss it now. Ethan, the inconsistencies, take it away.
Where do you want to start, Johnno? Well, What was your main one that was really from the get-go got you?
Well, look, you're right. It's hard to know where to start.
Yeah.
And my interest in this started off with them. In fact, most of what I do with this podcast and the other work that I do has to do with the media, because as we've discussed on this show before, the media controls the minds.
Yeah.
The media controls the minds of the masses. Ergo, the media controls the masses. So how are they trying to control them with this event? So my interest looks primarily at what was the media doing as a result of the incident. And what was interesting was how quickly it became obvious that Channel 7 was intertwined with the actual operation, to the point where the sniper was in the same room as a Channel 7 cameraman and a Channel 7 reporter as the incident was taking place. Now, anyone who's managed to deprogram themselves from the mainstream media will instantly wonder, how on earth is that possible? Yeah. How does that make any sense that you have a tactical team, a sniper team in an operational area with the mainstream media there? That's just absurd.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
Now, what explanation did Channel 7 give as to why this was the case? Well, what we'll do is, and we've done this a couple of times now, tried to play an audio clip over the microphone. So listeners, bear with us. If the audio quality isn't great, I apologise. But I want you to hear what Channel 7's explanation was as to why they were in that room for pretty much most of the evening. This is a clip from the Tuesday evening, the 6 p.m. bulletin. In Australia, the 6 p.m. bulletin is the main bulletin on the commercial networks. And on the Tuesday night, that was like the closure bulletin. Yeah. Really, this 6 p.m. bulletin on Channel 7 was like the key media bulletin for me of the whole incident. And their second segment of that bulletin was this.
To Chris Reason earlier from the Channel 7 News.
Now, this is a 3-minute clip, and I'm going to play it in full because I think the audience has to hear this. For me, this goes to the heart of the whole thing. So, listeners, please bear with me. I'm about to play a clip from that 6 p.m. bulletin of Chris Reason, who was, of course, the Channel 7 reporter who was with the sniper team the whole night.
And I spoke to Chris Reason earlier from the Channel 7 newsroom in Mutton Place.
Well, good evening, Katrina. Yeah, look, the police were very generous in letting us come back into the building. As you know, at 9:45 yesterday morning, the police had evacuated the Channel 7 offices within half an hour of the incident beginning. They considered it a public safety risk. Obviously, that it's a fishbowl of a newsroom covered by glass and only 30 metres away from the Lint Cafe. And at that stage, they didn't know what weaponry the gunman might have. He could have had explosives and, of course, shattered glass. They wanted people away from there, so they moved us all out of there. But we negotiated with them and begged with them that we would be allowed to have one camera stay behind, and graciously they said yes. So that cameraman, Greg Parker, was allowed to stay in position on floor 4, the sunrise floor, looking directly down and into the 4 windows of the Lint Cafe. And he was stationed right beside a police sniper, or 2 police snipers when the day began. I was allowed in a couple of hours later, and we began a siege in our own way, just watching what was going on in there. But people asked, why were they letting us in? Well, there was an exchange of information going on, effectively. We were able to offer them some very powerful and comprehensive technology in the form of state-of-the-art cameras. Cameras that could work in daylight, obviously, but also in very low-light conditions. And those cameras were pushing through the windows of Channel 7 and in through the windows of Lint Cafe, and we were able to make out the movements inside that cafe, the movements of the gunman and also of the hostages, and that was providing critical information for the police in their pre-planning for their strategic manoeuvres. And the entire time, the snipers were watching live output of those pictures to determine what was going on, the mentality of the gunman at any particular time, whether he was agitated, whether he was angry, whether he was calm, and indeed also to look at the hostages and their condition as well. So as I said, that information was being given freely by the police, and in fact directed by them at many times as well. And of course, the advantage for us was obvious. We're broadcasters, and we wanted to be back inside the Channel 7 offices to basically bring the country and the world the news of what was going on over there. We made a commitment to them as well that the pictures wouldn't be released until they said it was okay to do so. So that was effectively the origins of the deal, and that's how it came about. It was a very symbiotic and cooperative relationship for that time. both parties seem to get a lot out of it. Chris Reason in Sydney.
And as we were playing that, Jaden in the chat box asked the question, why do these newsreaders always talk like they've got a cucumber up their backside? And can I tell you, I've been going back over the TV coverage from that first day, over the last couple of days, just finding the bits that don't corroborate with other bits and all the rest of it. And it gets so draining listening to these people. When you get off TV, when you stop watching it, and then you come back to it, and I've had to come back to it for this incident, obviously, you do find yourself wondering, how do people do this every day at 6 p.m? I mean, putting aside this incident, we'll get back into it in a moment, but how do people do this?
And it's not just 6 p.m, it's all day now. All day on television. Family members were telling me, while this was happening, they were also as drained as I was watching it. They were saying, back in the day, it was 6 p.m. news, everyone was quiet, you had dinner, and the news was on. Now it's news at 3, we'll be back at 4 till 4:30, now we'll be back at 5. Oh, look, here's Eddie Maguire, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, now the project's on, late news, it's news, programming. It's just overwhelming.
It is incredible stuff, and I did notice when I was going back through the footage from that first day, how many times they would cut to a reporter on the scene and they'd say, for argument's sake, Emily, can you give us an update? And then Emily would say, well, not much has really happened here. Anyway, so look, that's a clip from Chris Reason. Now, I'm telling you right now, he is at the heart of all of this. That was the reason that he gave as to why they were allowed to be with the snipers. Supposedly because the snipers needed the cameras with their big zoom and their night vision. Now, any person who still has a functioning brain cell in their head will wonder, if the Channel 7 studio was just 30 metres across from the Link Cafe, which it was, what kind of sniper can't see through a window that's 30 metres away?
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And then people might say, oh, but there was, only the one sniper, or, he couldn't see everything. Well, then get more police in there. You know what I mean? Give them binoculars if you have to. Why the hell is a Channel 7 cameraman and newsman in an operations room of this kind of event? Why? Their explanation is because they were helping the police. No sane person could give that any amount of credence whatsoever, surely.
No, under which code of conduct would that be justified?
Yeah,
we'll just let them, because they can help us out. If a member of the public had a super duper camera on the side at any other hostage situation, you think they'd be taken into the tactical rooms with the snipers? Absolutely not. The media have, and just him all day flip-flopping between his stories and the amount of people that were in the room, how many snipers there were. So that's what mainly stuck out for you, was the media's relationship with how this went.
Not just the media's, but a particular segment of the media. I'm talking about Chris Reason of Channel 7. I'm talking about the cameraman, I think his name is Greg Parker, because 2 segments later, he is all in the same 6 p.m. bulletin. So on that 6 p.m. bulletin of the Tuesday night, the second segment was that Chris Reason one, saying, well, hey, people are asking how come you were there. Well, let me give you a ridiculous story to tell you why. Then the 4th segment of that news bulletin was an interview with the cameraman Parker. Now, that's a 6-minute clip. I don't want to play the entire thing, but it probably is worth playing just a portion of it so people can see how within the one news bulletin, within a single 6 p.m. news bulletin, their own story changes. Now, remember, from that Chris Reason thing that we just saw, he said that they were evacuated and that a few hours later, they negotiated to be allowed to go back into the camera room, if you like. That's what he said. Now let's listen to this segment from the same 6 p.m. bulletin just a few minutes later.
For more than 16 hours in Channel 7 Sydney newsroom, a lone police sniper did his best to keep eyes on Manharon Monas as he terrorised his captives. But throughout it all, there was another set of eyes on the harrowing.
Are you listening to this as he terrorised his captives? I mean, I'm not planning to focus on the news reader. He's just a puppet who reads cues, but this is what they were doing. Terrorising, as he held his captives. They're talking to children because that's what you are. If you think the news is real, you are at the intellectual level of an adolescent. Not your fault you've been programmed. The good news is you can deprogram yourself.
Yep.
Just get off the TV and notice a change. Within a couple of weeks, you'll notice a change. Then when you come back to the TV, you'll be like, what the... They're talking to me like an idiot. Yeah, that's because they think you are an idiot. But anyway, we'll press on with this.
One of our cameramen, whose pictures guided senior police as they monitored the gunman's every move.
For me, one of the hardest things to see was that there was 3 women forced to hold that flag up against the glass, and then another image of a poor guy in obvious distress with the muzzle of a shotgun, in frame.
And by the way, they're showing the frame as he says this. Does that look like a shotgun to you?
Is that an umbrella upside down? Or?
And why are they starting the segment with this? The thing that sticks out to me is this really emotional thing that's going to tug at your heartstrings. Why are they doing that? I always ask why they do that. They have a reason. The people who put this stuff together are very intelligent, and they know they're dealing with people who aren't. So I always question why they're doing what they're doing.
Being pointed at his head, and that was the first time we'd seen a clear threatening pose that the gun was pointed at a bloke's head who was in a very passive stance up against the glass.
Veteran cameraman Greg Parker has been around the block a few times. He's seen good, he's also seen evil.
And they overlaid Ben Breaker from the terrorism.
But it did start like any other day. One of our producers had literally just walked back in the door, a Lindt hot chocolate in hand.
Within minutes of the attack on the Lindt Cafe, Greg had 3 cameras, including one with a powerful 600mm lens, trained on the 4 coffee shop windows.
Now, do you like that? They just said that within moments of the incident starting, he had 3 cameras trained on what was happening. Interesting. We'll come back to that.
When police snipers arrived to take up position in our newsroom, they saw immediate value in keeping Greg at their side.
They saw immediate value in keeping Greg at their side, but hold on, just a few minutes ago you told us that the whole room was evacuated and you had to negotiate to get back let in.
Can't make this up.
Interesting, isn't it?
I knew we were getting something pretty remarkable in what we could see with that lens on the camera, and the sniper concurred and then said, could we stay there and keep sweeping and give
So this guy obviously hasn't been prepped on what Reason's going to say. They haven't got their stories straight. He's trying to say, we were in there filming, the snipers came in, checked our cameras and said, hey, we need you to stick around and help us. But that doesn't corroborate with what Reason had said a few minutes earlier in the bulletin. Fascinating, but it gets better.
Him continual information of what we were seeing behind the glass. They were, suitably impressed with the scope of what we were getting from our camera, and straight up said, "Can you stay? Can you keep that shot up for us?"
It was soon just Greg, a police sniper, and a police technician in the eerie quiet of an empty newsroom.
Except that I will link in the info box on AusRoundtable.com to an article from, I think it was The Guardian, so a mainstream article saying, no, the Channel 7 had their own security personnel in there as well as other people. So other media organisations also didn't get their story straight. All of their stories don't corroborate. Now, I'm going to play a couple more minutes, Ethan. I know we're running out of time, but this, I think, goes to the heart of the whole thing. So I will play just a couple more minutes.
For 16 hours, Greg quietly fed these remarkable, chilling images.
For 16 hours? Remember, Chris Reason has already told us that everyone was kicked out. Okay, now the whole thing went for 16 hours. So do the maths. It doesn't add up.
To police
unless you've been doing Common Core maths.
headquarters.
The guys back in the police sort of command were then asking for specific shots. So we would we put on Kevlar vests and came down and relocated cameras as they needed them to be, specifically that.
Okay, you guys can't see the footage that I'm showing here at the moment, but even just listening to his audio, this guy doesn't really sound like he's telling a story about what happened the day before, does he? You know what I mean? It doesn't sound convincing at all, and you should see the footage. He doesn't look convincing either.
Window that they called Window 4, where the flag was being sort of held up, was where the gunman was continually sort of positioning himself and putting hostages between himself and the window and himself and the door. It was genuinely horrible. In 20 years, you know, it's very rare to come across such upsetting...
Very horrible, such upsetting, distressing. Notice the use of language again, it's not by accident.
Footage, there's nothing you can do.
As the world watched the chaos and heartbreak of...
The chaos and heartbreak.
Australia's biggest city, grappling to come to grips with terror, Greg and the police sniper crouched quietly just metres from the scene.
For a real long time, it was just him and I think for 5 or 6 hours, making small talk, and you know, to be honest, the situation. So
hold on, you've got a sniper there trained on a scene that's actually happening, and he's making small talk with cameraman Greg. You have to be so conditioned. You have to be so programmed to believe any of this nonsense. Now, Ethan, I can see that we've got more to talk about, and we are getting towards the end of the show, but since we've already started with this segment, I will just play a couple more minutes, because like I said, this goes to the heart.
Kept us pretty busy because we were both looking for any opportunity that was going to affect a positive outcome, and then we continually were sort of blown away at just how sad the situation.
We were just continually sort of looks to the side, blown away by how, again, all he has is emotive rhetoric and a story that doesn't make sense. That's all he has.
Was as it went on and on, we both just were sort of praying that these families were, these people were going to get out.
There were little victories.
Every time hostages escaped, we were cheering, high-fiving almost. It was awesome to see, but then the longer it went on, the lights went off, signs weren't looking good, and the scene was getting sort of worse by the hour.
As the hours ticked by, the gunman's behaviour became more erratic.
We continually saw him moving, almost shoving them, walking behind.
They're showing footage, and I don't see any shoving happening there. Like, this is how arrogant these people are. This is how stupid they think the viewers are. That they will say something that contradicts what is on screen at the time, and the idea is, as long as they only show short clips, they can say anything, and you'll just imagine the rest. Yep. They're not showing any... Now, I'm not saying this terrorist didn't shove the dudes. I'm just saying that they are so blatant in their disinfo, they will overlay a story that doesn't match the video footage that they're showing at the same time.
Really intimidating, angry, kind of threatening manner. It was just...
Angry, threatening, intimidating.
Horrible to see.
Horrible.
You could see him communicating, and especially after those guys escaped, he became quite agitated. He was grabbing the hostages and moving them and continually keeping them between the window and himself, it seemed.
Still, the entire focus of emergency services was obtaining a peaceful resolution.
I was in awe of the way they handled it and the patience they showed, because they were tried and proven methods of how to get the best possible result.
Yeah, the tried and proven method is to have a chat with the cameraman.
Almost high-fiving, Johnno. Almost high-five.
Woohoo!
And that was constantly being relayed to us.
But their patience ran out with the echo of a single gunshot.
Now, I don't know if that one came across on the microphone too well, but did that sound like a gunshot to you?
Cap gun.
Sounded like two people high-fiving to me.
It was him and the sniper high-fiving.
We heard a shot. He confirmed hostage down, window 2.
Now, if they have all of these cameras trained on what was happening, you'd think that they might be able to show, even if they blur out the violent part, you'd think they'd be able to show that thing that they just talked about, wouldn't you? They don't show it.
6 seconds later, we saw the Special Forces guys breach.
And then he says 6 seconds later, after the shot, we saw the Special Forces breach. Now, that's where I'm going to leave that clip. There are a couple minutes left, but what I'll do is eventually I'll get around to uploading this to YouTube. But did you hear what he just said? 6 seconds after the shot is when the police breached, when they went in. The thing is, even that doesn't corroborate with the official story, which is that they heard the shot, and then 9 minutes later, they went in, or 7 minutes later, they went in. In fact, a couple of days later, Channel 7 even ran an article saying the suspicious missing 7 minutes. They've been caught out here, Ethan.
Yeah,
They've been caught out big time, falsifying their story. Now, the person has to ask, why are they falsifying this story? Why? No, I'm not saying they're falsifying the whole story, yes. All I'm focusing on here is Channel 7's coverage and their 6 p.m. bulletin. How come their stories are changing within the space of a single bulletin? Why?
No, it's very troubling. Troubling concerns. And right off the bat, I had questions too. And I'll go through some of the questions that I asked immediately following the siege. And
I'm looking forward to this, Ethan. Before you do, well, normally this is a 90-minute podcast. Now, I'm more than happy to go a bit longer today. This is a very important episode. And the people in the live chat box, we've got 20 people watching now, which is fantastic. When we first started this show, we thought we'd be lucky to get 20 downloads every week. We've been getting hundreds of downloads every week, and that means that our listeners are spreading the word, so we thank you for that. And thanks to everyone taking part in the chat box. There's been some really funny comments there. They're cracking me up. So keep them coming. Ethan, give us some of your questions about what you saw.
Well, the very first thing that got me was one of the first witnesses that was reported in the Daily Telegraph. Now, I'll read a little bit of it. It says, a Sydney man who came face-to-face with the hostage government says he threatened to, quote, shoot him too. Now, this man was Craig Stoker, his name is. He was walking down Phillip Street after buying a coffee in the Link Cafe when he bumped into the gunman. So the narrative is that he bumped into the gunman beforehand. Quote, he was wearing a black T-shirt with white writing on it and a headband and carrying a blue bag, he said. The bag bumped into me, and there was something hard in it. I said, watch where you were effing going. He turned around and said, quote, do you want me to shoot you too? I looked into his eyes and they were crazy. I was pretty freaked out. This is a direct quote. But then here's the most important part. He then says the bearded man was dressed. The bearded man was with two others who were similarly dressed. He said that he was with two other people.
Yep.
Monis was with two other people and had no idea how lucky his escape was. So straight off the bat, I'm being told that there's this lone wolf that we've spoken about, yet one of the very first witnesses that is being interviewed by the Daily Telegraph says that he was with two other people heading towards the cafe. Shouldn't that raise a lot of concerns?
Yeah.
There was more questions that I had, and I remembered reporting on tottnews.com when it happened of prior hostage drills that happened in the exact same place in Sydney the year before. And what I noticed was videos of these were being removed from social networking sites all day on social media. News reports showing the Martin Place, Sydney anti-terrorism drills that were happening were being removed. So I was asking myself, why are these hostage drills being removed? And we know from major events such as 9/11 and all of these others, the drills normally happen at the exact same time that an event's happening or prior. It's been pre-planned. They've planned to do an event like this. So straight off the bat, they're being censored, so that raises a lot of questions. The next question was, why was he released on bail? I did some research as a man, quote, posing no threat, according to the judge, after facing accessory to his ex-wife's murder and more than 40 sexual offences charges against several women. Furthermore, is it a coincidence that he was released under new bail laws the government have been pushing to tighten? And I'll get into that in a few minutes. The police they say that they were refusing to allow it to be broadcasted. I say that they were censoring it. The people questioning the legitimacy of the hostage videos. Now, there were hostage videos released where they expressed their demands. And straight off the bat, you can hear a lady behind the camera saying, yep, go, it's on.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3.
You can see it being directed. You can see no fear or even emotion in some of these voices, or through the physical features that you can see on these people. And the demands are just completely just uncharacteristic of what you'd expect from a, quote, terrorist attack. He wants the media to be covering it, All of this just made no sense at all. And people were making videos questioning the legitimacy of these hostage videos, saying, hang on, if you're a hostage and this guy has got a gun and it's as terrible as the media are saying, why are you just casually standing there with a director behind the camera?
Yeah, and if it's one guy organising all of this, if he has to basically be the writer and the producer and the director of this terrorist video, sure, he might get one of the other terrorists to film it, and then he might get one of the other hostages to film it, and one of the other hostages to hold up the flag. What are the other guys doing? You know what I mean?
That's right.
Like, what are they doing? Now, people will say, oh, they're locked in, but if you go back and look at the footage of that first guy, that John O'Brien, whatever his name was, the first guy who escaped, he was crouching, he pressed the button to get out of the main exit, okay? You can actually see him press the button, the doors open, and out he gets. So they weren't locked in at all.
No.
At least not from they could get out from the inside. There's no question about that. We saw one of them do it.
Yeah.
So, this guy is scripting and directing a terrorism video. What the hell are the other hostages doing?
That's right.
They're not tied down.
And it's just unbelievable. And the major one that got me, because, Johnno, I've researched a lot into intelligence organisations in Australia. I had a bit of a brain fart there talking about the media. How did one of the most comprehensive intelligence networks on the planet allow a man who was known to the media, courts, intelligence agencies and police before the event, and I'll link to all of these that I'm adding emphasis on, these written articles, how did they allow him to carry out this so-called siege so easily? Surely the incompetence is not this prevalent. This is going with the official narrative. How did he slip off the radar, as Tony Abbott has said in his press conference? Didn't we just raise the terrorism level to high? How was someone that was that supposedly sent letters to the family members of dead soldiers, how is he not on a suspected ASIO terror list, as an article that I'll link to in the description box, and Tony Abbott's come out and said that he was troubled with. This man was not on an ASIO terror list. After doing that, after being subject to 40 counts of sexual assault charges, after doing all of this, gets let off bail, goes into a so-called 6-day loop where he disappears from the system. How was this allowed to happen by intelligence organisations? Are you going to tell me that they're this incompetent on purpose?
Can I make 2 points on that?
Yep.
The first one is I don't know if ASIO also have files on their employees, and I wonder if the reason why he wasn't on the terror watch list is because he's on the payroll. But look, we'll come back. Listen, that's just a joke. We'll come back to that later. But the next point that I would make on that is, here's where I see this one going. This is a classic problem, reaction, solution one. What they're going to say is, hey, the AFP and ASIO and ASIS, the left hand doesn't know what the right one's doing. They're not well coordinated enough. Look, we had a guy, it's clear he should have been on a watch list. Why wasn't he on a watch list? Looks like we have to start ourselves a new Department of Homeland Security. Now, maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, Ethan, you mentioned in one of your segments that you had seen that the government and the media were discussing Australia creating its own Department of Homeland Security. Now, there was pushback at that, even reportedly at cabinet level. So that one kind of was hit on the head at the time. But when this topic comes up again, you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be pushing for a Department of Homeland Security. No doubt about it in my mind.
Absolutely, because of the incompetence that was allowed to be, let loose. You can't tell me that they're like this on purpose.
To Mr. 79 Savvy in the chat room, mate, good to have you on board. Spread the word. The more listeners, the better. Lovely. Thank you for the comments as well. We appreciate it. So that was the Sheikh Haron you were talking about, right? Supposedly not on a watch list. Yeah, okay, whatever. I've been looking into him myself, and here's some of the information that I've got on him. They're calling him Man Haron Monis. Iran is saying, and I've got this from the Sydney Morning Herald, that his birth name was Mohammed Hassan Mantegi. But he also apparently went by the name Ayatollah Mantegi Borodjerdi. So he's got all of these different names. Now, I'm happy to keep calling him Man Haron Monis, even though that name, I think, is a fake name.
Yeah.
I'm going to call him that for the rest of what I'm about to say. I found out that when he was charged with some of those charges that you mentioned, he and his partner both had to post bail. Would you like to guess how much surety they had to put up for their bail? He had to put up $10,000. His partner had to put up $100,000. Now, where are these two jokers finding someone to offer up 110 grand worth of security? Hey? Where?
From all the people that are funding ISIS overseas and all these bank
where are they getting this money? But hey, look, in theory, it's possible.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, who's been defending them? Who is the crack lawyer that's so good that he can get these people out on bail in the first place, putting aside the money incident? Turns out that his lawyer was a guy named Emmanuel Manny Konditsis. I looked into this character. He was the winner of the 2012 Law Society President's Award. He successfully defended the Australian boxer Dean Waters in 1988. That was a huge incident at the time, probably a bit before our time, Ethan. He represented the disgraced former NRL star Ryan Tandy, and he also represented the Lulz Sec leader, Matthew Flannery, who was convicted and got 15 months home detention for his, alleged work with Lulz Sec. Yeah. So this guy, Emmanuel Konditsis, this guy's a high-profile lawyer. These guys don't come cheap, unless they're doing the work for free, which he might be, but why would we assume that? I haven't seen anything that I've read from him saying that he was defending this character for free. So where's the guy getting the money to pay for the lawyer, and where's he getting someone to secure him for 110 grand for the charges that he was bailed out on? And why isn't the media talking about any of that?
That's right. That's the main point you got to go back to. Why are the media serving an agenda? Why do they discuss... all of our listeners, and we've discussed this to death on here, but there is an agenda at hand, and it can't... We're just getting to the tip of the iceberg with all of this. It's too much to put in, It's just the inconsistencies, even down to the very last minute. You want to talk about the very last detail. You want to talk about programming of the people that happened in Martin Place to push the narrative of Martin Bryant, that happened in Port Arthur, which was a staged event itself.
Yep.
This is all calculated by people with a subconscious.
I tell you what, we're more than an hour and a half into the show. I think it's time to let the cat out of the bag. We've tried to do our best to not put off any new listeners to the show who aren't familiar with the fact that hoaxes are happening all around the world. I'm going to let the shackles off right now. You say that Port Arthur was a staged event. Of course it was, and so was this.
Yeah.
Let's not, no more beating around the bush. Probably some of our listeners are going, these guys shills, why aren't they admitting the obvious here that this was staged? Let's throw off the shackles. I'm saying right now, this was a 100% staged event. There's no question in my mind.
I believe it was staged too. Looking at it with all the inconsistencies, you need to look. People need to understand. If you look at this from a legal perspective, if this was brought to a court of law, where witness testimonies don't match up, where all of this, it brings for reasonable doubt to say that the official story is false. So in this episode, we've broken down that. For a fact, the media and the government benefit from this, whether it was real, staged, or whatever.
Quid bono. This is why they don't teach this in school, because it's an important part of critical thinking. Quid bono. Who benefits? Who benefits from this? Well, you've broken down how the government's going to benefit from this. I've broken down how the media are a part of lying, so the false story can't be real. So when the original story can't be real. So if the official story isn't real, and there's a group or a couple of groups who seem like they're going to benefit, the logical thing to do is to infer that they're the ones who are benefiting from it, until any evidence is presented to either torpedo your theory or prove the official one. Now, where's the evidence proving the official story?
That's right.
Where is it? It doesn't exist.
And there was an article on Independent Australia by Bob Ellis talking about the things that we don't know yet, that we should know. He said that this, something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, he said that this is one of the slowest revealing events that has happened in the country because of the lack of details that are coming out. Now, I'm not sure if these have been revealed from the time that I've got this, but most of them I've checked haven't been. But he said, we don't know whose bullets or stun grenades killed Katrina Dawson. We don't know yet whose weaponry wounded 4 others. We don't know the others. He said, we don't know why there were so many shots fired and whether in the dark they knew who they were shooting at. This is an opinion piece, by the way. But questions need to be raised. We don't know why this has not been revealed. We don't know why the police have forbidden the hostages from giving any detailed media interviews. They've given some interviews on the basics, but they said that we can't speak about it. We don't know why the Prime Minister refused to help when 2 of them begged for it. And the Prime Minister was given all this false information in his press conference where he said that he had a gun licence when the Australian Federal Police fed the wrong information to him, to the Prime Minister of the country. Yeah. He said, how did he get a gun licence? And then it had to come out in the news later, he didn't have a gun licence. And Abbott, who was already looking like he was infuriated and supposedly was going to investigate this, in amongst pushing the official narrative, which we believe is a lie,
we know he's a lie.
He's showing lies as well. He's spitting even more lies inside of the lies. He can't even
the web of lies.
And he said, we don't know why a Muslim clergy was not allowed to talk to the terrorist, as has happened in similar situations hundreds of times, thousands of times across the world. And he's given references to different events that this has happened. Why was someone that was similar to him not taken in there? They interviewed all of these rubbish hostage negotiators all throughout the day on the media talking about what you do in a hostage situation. Where were the people that were going in? This didn't follow any of the usual protocols, Johnno.
No, it didn't. And just on that exact note, I've lost my train of thought there, man. There's so much to all of this. Where were we? Oh, yeah, the AFP and the gun licensing. Yeah, so we've got the Prime Minister of the country getting up there and saying, oh, he had a gun license. And then it turns out, no, he didn't. Like, even on the minute details, they're getting their own stories wrong. And you have to ask yourself why. Now, when you say, why didn't they send in a negotiator, a Muslim cleric or whatever to negotiate with the guy? Well, I don't know if you found this in your research. Obviously, for the listeners, Ethan and I live, I don't know, like an hour away by train. So we don't get a chance to hang out. This is the first time I've seen you since this incident happened. And we do our own independent research. We get together before the show, have a quick chat. But I don't actually know how far you've gone down different paths with your research and me with myself and my own research. We're not necessarily on the same page with all of this. I don't know how far you've looked into all of this, but a guy in our live chat box called Dwayne Williamson posted a link just a few minutes ago to an article from 2007 by a Muslim exposing the fact that the sheikh was fake. He was a fake sheikh. Yeah. He wasn't a genuine Muslim in any way. No part of the Muslim community had anything to do with this guy, and that was being exposed by fellow Muslims years and years and years ago. And the reason they were doing that is because this fake sheikh was making headlines, doing all this weird shit, sending letters to the families of dead soldiers, which, by the way, how do you find the addresses?
That's exactly
that doesn't make any sense to me. But let's pretend that was all true, that he was doing that, whatever. he was making a lot of news for all the wrong reasons, hurting the image of Muslims. So other Muslims, and you can find articles and forums, I found a whole bunch of people all saying, this guy is a fake sheikh, he has nothing to do with us. From years ago. So Dwayne Williamson, thank you for the link. It's probably to something that I've already read myself and that I've verified with other forums. The Muslim community on their online forums was exposing this joker years ago.
Yep. No,
Years ago.
I actually remember him being in the media and exposing him as a fake one. This was just from Bob Ellis's perspective in terms of the official narrative, to break it down for people to believe the official narrative, to say, well, why didn't all of these things happen? Now, obviously, we have different views to Bob Ellis in this because we don't believe the event happened the way that the official narrative is saying, but even the independent, sort of mainstream independent media that go along with the official narrative, even they are questioning, and he concluded saying, we don't know much about anything, and we can only surmise an enormous cover-up is taking place, which was just... anyone who looks into this can see that there's something is being covered up and that the official narrative just cannot be true at all, John.
The official story doesn't make any sense at all, and the further that you look into this fake sheikh, the less that any of his story makes sense, at least going by what we've been told by the media. Now, I saw an interesting article from an alternative outlet, which, by the way, normally in our show, we just read from the mainstream and we let them, give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves, right? We just read from the official narratives. I don't usually quote from alternative source. I'm not going to quote from an alternative source now, but I did see an article that I'll link to on the website, and they made the interesting point that this moderate Muslim, if you go back to the early reporting about this guy when he first made the headwaves, he was a moderate Muslim who loved the West. Like, that's what he was saying. That's what he was being promoted by in the media. So he was serving a purpose for a narrative back then. You know what I mean? You want lots of... we do have a large immigration rate in this country. It's a huge immigration rate. In fact, I was looking at it just the other day. Of all wealthy developed nations, we have the second highest rate of immigration per capita of any country behind Spain. And a lot of Spain's is from other countries in Europe, you know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas we're an island nation. Our immigrants are all coming here by plane or by boat. So we have a massive amount of immigration. And at the time, this guy was serving a good purpose. He was a moderate Muslim who loves the West, and he hated Iran, you see. He was decrying Iran because they were supposedly... imprisoning his wife and daughter, whatever. So he was useful in pushing this narrative of Iran evil, moderate Muslims good. Then, sometime later, he morphed into the crazy Muslim who mailed dead soldiers, right? And you can see all these articles about him mailing the dead soldiers. So not only did he now make Muslims look bad for the purpose of this terrorism narrative that they're pushing, but he also made anyone who was against the war look stupid. Like, look, if you're against war, what, are you dumb enough to send the letters to the family members? He made anyone who was anti-war look stupid at the time we're at war. Now, people might say, well, hold on, those are two very different narratives. How can the media push both? Well, they're pushing both right now. I mean, right now we're being told to be scared of terror, but to love the massive waves of immigration is utterly ridiculous. So they'll push both narratives at the same time. He started off helping him push one, then he morphed into helping him push the other one. Now he's made it his final little metamorphosis, and he's not just a crazy, angry Muslim. He's the lone nut terrorist, and he's going to be used to push more draconian laws to take away our rights because, hey, there's all these lone nuts out there. This guy, this Sheikh Harun Monis, Ayatollah Mantegi Borujerdi, Mohammed Hassan Matigi, whatever you want to call this dude, he has been very useful for the government and for media to push the narratives, and he's done it more than once.
Absolutely. Just as every boogeyman have been useful, and most of the time, as we know with Osama bin Laden, was a CIA operative, and who's not to say that Monis wasn't in there. Now, I know some people have brought up in the comments, speaking about how we spoke about, and because we're on a general discussion as we finish off the last 10 minutes of the show, Johnno, some people in the comments have mentioned that, yes, in the relation to Port Arthur, it is staged, but someone said, but at Port Arthur, I saw bodies. So that brings up the question, was this just a staged event, or does it go a little further? Yeah,
well, the thing with Port Arthur, and I was discussing this on either the We'll Do It Live podcast with Jeff C. and Free Radio Revolution and Press Reset Earth, or on the Max Resistance Roundtable with Up North and Brian Roberts. On one of the shows, I was on both during the week, and I discussed how the reason why I think that people probably did die at Port Arthur back in 96 or whenever it was because there was footage released. It's still available on the net if you go looking for it, like the police footage inside the cafe immediately after the event. And I haven't looked at that footage for a long time, but when I did find it many moons ago. At the time, it seemed to me legitimate. Now, at the time, I wasn't awake to how many of these staged hoaxes are taking place around the world, so maybe I didn't look at it with a critical enough eye. But my feelings have always been like the official story of Port Arthur doesn't make sense to anyone with a functioning brain. It just doesn't. It just doesn't at all in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't follow from that no one died. So I'm not willing to go on the record and say that no one died at Port Arthur. I don't know. I'm open-minded to either argument. Yeah. But with this one, this one, what evidence do we have? Because people are going to say, "Oh, you're saying it was staged. That's very disrespectful to the family." Okay, then let's talk about disrespectful to the family. I'll link in the info box to our website, which will have links to a couple of articles, one from Haaretz and one I think was from the Daily Telegraph, showing photos of Tory Johnson, one of the two victims, showing photos of his father smiling, separate photos both showing him smiling, apparently gleeful, making weird hand signals that his, I think the supposed victim's daughter was also, sister was also making. A couple of them both making weird hand signals, and all of these smiles on their faces 3 days after their relative has supposedly been gunned down in a terrorist incident. Yep. Now, a lot of people out there, they still can't talk about their dead. Like, when someone's son or daughter passes early, that's one of the most terrible things that can happen to anyone. And for a lot of people, they still can't talk about it years after the fact. But we're supposed to believe that this guy, 3 days after the fact, was smiling and having a good time at a big flower ceremony for his son. You want to talk to me about disrespectful? I tell you what, you tell me what's respectful. You know, if your family's just died, you tell me what's respectful.
And I seen you showed me before we went on air. You showed me the photo of this, and it's just unbelievable. It's the same as Sandy Hook, where supposed fathers were before he went on air was laughing and smiling, then gets into character. For me, I do believe it was a staged event, but when I'm trying to cross into whether it was a hoax, whether it was just completely all fake, that's something at the moment I can't confidently prove or say that it was a complete hoax, that it was all a big movie set, even though it looks like it. And everything I've said today, like, I wouldn't write this as an article on my website, because what media should be is not serve an agenda. It shouldn't serve my personal opinion of an agenda. It should be facts and evidence and support so I'm just putting that out as a disclaimer that my website, that's why I did the article solely exposing who benefits from it and what it's going to be doing, just solely facts. And then this is a discussion panel for personal opinions, as you've said at the start of the show. So, but for me, going into the whole realm of whether it was a hoax, it's something that I feel watching it, but it's not something I can conclusively prove at the moment.
And look, Justice for Germans has just made a good point in the info box that it wasn't just that this guy was a fake sheikh. It was that a lot of his lifestyle did not match with the faith of Islam in any way, shape or form, and that's also true. We haven't had time to go into that. Sadly, we've only just scratched the tip of the iceberg on the stuff that we could talk about, why we don't believe the official story. But Ethan, you make a very good distinction. It's one thing that something is a staged event. It's one thing that it's a hoax. Because you can stage an event and actually have people die. You know, you can just get a patsy in there to do it, or an SAS shooter or whatever. So have people actually die, but it's still not, the official story is wrong, right? And you make a good distinction. Just as I said, I'm not certain what happened at Port Arthur. Did people die or not? I'm open-minded both. I'm still very much open-minded to the possibility that Tory Johnson and Katrina Dawson died on that day. I'm open-minded to that possibility. And if I see any evidence that proves it, that's fine by me. I'm happy to believe that. And if that were the case, I would have a lot of sympathy for the poor family who had to go through it. The issue at the moment is they haven't actually shown us any evidence to believe that. They've told us that that's what's happened, but as we've already proven, they're going to say anything. In fact, they'll lie to you from 1 minute to another minute. So just because the media says something doesn't mean that it's true. Just because they haven't provided evidence doesn't mean that it's not true. So I'm open-minded to whether or not people did die or whether it was a complete hoax. But what is clear to me, I'm very confident now, is this was a staged event. And I'm happy to go on record and state that clearly. Now, you asked me what reasons do I have to think it was staged. I showed you the main reason, which was Chris Reeves and the cameraman, and the bullshit story about how come the sniper was in the same room as a cameraman and all these other people. We've shown that doesn't make sense. I don't have time now to play a clip that I wanted to play because we have to wrap up the show in a couple of minutes. But there's 2 points. The first point was the one that I've made. Why was the sniper in the same room as the cameraman? This story doesn't make sense. The other point, and this is a point that I've seen many Australians making on social media, on forums and these kinds of things, is why didn't the sniper take the shot? Why didn't he take the shot? If the cameras had clear shots of the guy, then so did the snipers. They were 30 metres away, okay? 30 or 40 metres away.
30 metres is not far at all.
You don't even need a sniper to shoot that far. No. Any trained marksman can shoot 30 or 40 metres with a long rifle, let alone a sniper with a sniper rifle, okay? And this is the question a lot of people are asking. Why didn't he take the shot? Why didn't he take the shot? I've seen 2 official stories given. One of the official stories is that, he had cables coming out of his backpack. We thought he had a dead man switch. We couldn't kill him in case that killed everyone. Well, if that's the case, that still applies later in the night when they raided it. You see?
That's exactly
if that is the reason they didn't do it, if that's the reason why they didn't kill him, then why did they go and kill him later on? It doesn't make sense. The story that I saw on yesterday's Saturday morning show with Ray Hadley, who was also part of this whole thing, he was interviewing the New South Wales Police Commissioner, whose name escapes me, Scipione, or whatever his name is. He was interviewing him. Scipione said yesterday morning on live air, by the way, on CGB in Sydney, said that Scipione, the police commissioner's wife and daughter, had been in the Link Cafe an hour before the incident. This is what I mean. Yeah. All of New South Wales was there just before it happened, including the police commissioner's own wife and daughter. But what he also said in that interview, because Ray Hadley said, we have to put to rest, I'm paraphrasing here, we have to put to rest this question of why didn't the snipers take him out? We shouldn't be second-guessing the officials. There's good reasons why they didn't take him out. And what was the reason? This Link Cafe used to be a bank, so it had hardened glass, and this would deflect the bullet. Now, I've looked into this, and from all the good information I've got, it is true that even high-powered bullets can be deflected by glass. This is true. That's exactly why sniper teams use tactics such as double shots. They'll have two snipers shoot almost simultaneously. The first one is just shooting to break the glass, and then a moment later, the second one shoots at the target.
Yep.
For this exact reason, okay? You have to think through this, people. So the first story they gave us, the bomb in the backpack, doesn't make sense based on their own actions. The second story they've given us, that they didn't take the shot because of the glass, is utterly ridiculous. So the question remains, why didn't they take the shot? Those are the two questions that I want answered before I'll believe that this incident was real. Why was the cameraman and why was the whole Channel 7 news group in on this whole thing from the start? And why didn't the sniper take the shot when he had the chance? Those are my first two questions. I've got 100, but I want to leave the listeners with those points. Those are my two big questions. You answer those and I'll change my mind. I'd be happy to prove everyone wrong on this, all right?
Yeah,
I mean, not happy in the sense that didn't mean that people actually died, which would make me upset. But I'd be more than happy to admit that I was wrong if evidence was provided. I don't think that evidence is going to be provided.
No. I think you summed that up absolutely fantastically, Johnno.
Well, look, thanks, Ethan. I appreciate that. Now, we do have to wrap up. You've got a long trip to make home. I could sit here for 4 hours, you know what I mean? But we do have to get going. So,
And before we wanted to go, I just wanted to, we give our final thoughts every episode. I just wanted to give some final thoughts to do with bail. And this is, I'll briefly touch on this. The Sydney Morning Herald on December 16th of the day said the New South Wales government has called for an investigation into why Monis, quote, slipped through the cracks of the judicial system and was released from custody. It follows calls for the government to fast-track stricter bail laws in light of the tragedy. New South Wales Attorney General Brad Hazzard said on Tuesday that stricter bail laws would take effect at the end of January, and it was, quote, very unlikely that Monis would have been released on bail under these new rules that have been in place. Quote, this government has changed the Bail Act to ensure greater safety for our community. It was changed to ensure that offenders involved in serious crime will not get bail. Now, the reason I brought this up is because in the research I've been doing for this documentary, talking about David Cameron, talking about everyone that's coming out against preachers of hate, anyone that speaks out against the system.
Anybody who thinks that the 7/7 bombings was an inside job or that 9/11 was a Jewish plot.
That's right.
Those are his words.
Absolute his words.
As an extreme is on this par with terrorists. Those are his words.
That's right. Unbelievable stuff. And this, I related to that because if we start being rounded up, if they start targeting people that question the system, if they start arresting us under these draconian legislations, now because the preachers of hate, because of the link between lone terrorism and how lone terrorists are preachers of hate, how ISIS people are preachers of hate, and how we justify a world to live in, we could then be under these bail laws as well. When everything's flipped on us to make us the new boogeyman right at the end, the final one, that's when these laws are going to take effect. So I think that's an extremely important thing. I just wanted to leave the people
on. It's a very good point. I'm glad you bring it up. And look, I suspect that on our next episode, and we haven't discussed, I'm happy to do another roundtable in a week's time. We shouldn't be discussing this on air, but hey, since we're here, I'll be here to do the roundtable next week. So listeners, if you want to listen in, I could be here by myself. I'm not sure if Ethan's going to be able to join me.
Yep, I'll be here.
All right, well, we'll do this again in a week's time. We should have discussed it before the show, but that's all right. We've had lots to discuss. We do have to wrap up the show, sadly, but I'm glad that you bring that last point up because that segues into my final thoughts on all of this. Now, on the Max Resistance Roundtable and the We'll Do It Live podcast, which I recommend people check out, and again, the links will be on the website as they always are. I did notice that a few people seem more despondent than usual. People in our community, skeptical people. There are still skeptical people out there, and so we should be. a few of them did seem more despondent than usual for a couple of reasons. One is because more YouTube channels are being taken down. Anyone who put up a video about this was at risk of having their video taken down, which is why I find it interesting that our mate SUNV, that troll in our chat box before the show, it is interesting that all of his videos are up. Now, I did link to this podcast today on one of his videos, as I did link on Team Wake 'em Up and one other channel whose videos are still up, fortunately. I did link to them. All of Sunv's videos are still up, and I only watched the first one. I haven't watched all of them. I did find them interesting. So the people in the chat box who are wondering, we don't know who that Sunv character is. That's the first contact I've made with him today when I linked to our chat box on his channel. I just said, hey, good to see you doing this kind of work, or something like this is what I said. I can't remember exactly. Then I gave a link to our channel. Next thing, when we came to do the live show, he's trolling our chat box. We don't know why he was doing that. Sunv, if you're listening to this, what you did was wrong, but if that was just an emotional outburst and you want to be sensible or whatever, get in touch with us. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but you are banned from the chat box until you do that, and for good reason. Thanks to all of our live chat box users for dealing with him the way that they should. I thought you did a terrific job. Now moving on to that final thought I wanted to touch on, and that is this. These despondent people, they're getting despondent because they're afraid. And look at PK22 doing awesome work down in Melbourne. He's been saying some rather macabre things lately. He actually is saying that he fears for his life doing the work that he does. This is the kind of work that he does, by the way. He's been exposing the Boston bombings for I think more than a year now. He's been exposing that hoax, and that's a clear hoax. And he's saying that he's fearing for his life and he doesn't really know if he's going to be doing this work anymore. And that's really strong rhetoric to come from that guy. I've been following that guy for a long time. And people are getting their channels banned and people are getting despondent. And I understand that. This is a time when people might be getting despondent. I'm coming at this from a completely different perspective. I'm actually feeling excited right now. I think that they're ramping all of this up because the end times are near. And I don't mean in a religious or a biblical sense. I mean they're ramping up towards something. And we are in a fight right now, Ethan. All of our listeners are in a fight. If you're listening to this podcast, then you're on any list that I'm on. Right now, I don't personally fear for my life, okay? Because I'm not afraid of death. And we've discussed this on other episodes. That's the biggest fear of all. Once they've got you afraid of death, they can control you. That's why humans, it's better to farm humans than to farm any other animal. Because you can't really make sheep afraid of what you're going to do to them in the future. You know what I mean? You can make humans afraid. So I'm not afraid of doing this work, and I don't think I should be. I haven't said anything on the show that I wouldn't say in a court of law. I'd be happy to say any of this. Show me the evidence, I'll believe your story. This is my story, here's my evidence. Let's have a proper discussion about it. You know what I mean? So I don't think I've got anything to fear, but I understand that other people do fear. Here's the point I want to make to all of our listeners and anyone who might be listening to this now or in the future. Pardon me there. My point is this. If you're listening to this show, then you're part of this skeptical movement. And if you're afraid that you're on a list, well, you're already on the list. So now's the time to speak out. You know what I mean? Don't be afraid. Don't get despondent. Now's the time to be excited. You know, we've got the internet. We might not have it for long. Let's use it while we have it. I'm glad that I can use this. I enjoy spending my time with you, Ethan. And when Lindsay, when he's here, I enjoy spending my time with him. I enjoy doing the research for the show. I enjoy communicating with the listeners. I enjoy the feedback that we get from the listeners. What we're doing on this show has been a fantastic thing for my life. You know what I mean? I've really enjoyed it. And I encourage people on every single podcast that I do, I try to anyhow, to say, hey, if I can do this, you can do this. If I can do this, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you can do this. You can do this. You can do this. You can buy yourself a microphone. You can start doing this kind of podcast. Get in touch with us. We'll promote it. Oh, listen. You think I want to watch the news anymore? I spent the last 4 days analysing the news, mate. It's mind-numbing shit. I don't want any more TV. After this incident, I'm destroying my TV. It came in handy here. I'm going to destroy this thing. But what I'm not going to destroy is this USB mic. This thing allows me to get my voice out to the world, and it will allow you to get your voice out to the world. So if you have the kind of questions that we have, voice them. Voice them online while we can. The more of us who do, the harder it's going to be if they ever do decide to try and take us down. And that's my final thought.
Absolutely fantastic. Fantastic way to end the show there. So I guess that's it this time, this week of the Australian Roundtable podcast. We'll be back next week from 4 p.m. on Sunday, Australian Eastern Standard Time, to discuss perhaps even more in depth of the Sydney siege that has happened. So please tune in. Thanks to all the listeners that have tuned in, and we'll see you next week.
And thanks to you, Ethan, because obviously you're in a rush. You've even skipped your final thought because you need to get on the train and go home. Ethan, thank you for all of your work. You are doing fantastic work on Todd News, and I recommend all the listeners check out TOTT News and all the articles you've been doing, and I'm sure there'll be more coming up in the next few days, and I look forward to reading them. Thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. Thanks to everyone in the chat box. This is the most live listeners we've ever had. We've had 20, sometimes more than 20 live listeners as we speak. This podcast will probably get hundreds of downloads by next week. Thank you to everyone for spreading the word. We really appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, guys. Take care of those around you. That's the most important thing right now. And thanks again for spreading the word because we really appreciate it. We'll see you at 4 p.m. next week. This has been the Australian Roundtable podcast on the week of the Sydney siege.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.